Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Andy. Are we ready to go?
Yep.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone to our OPAC meeting on this beautiful June 14th Friday. Today's focus is on offshore wind, so I know that's of a lot of interest to many of you, so I appreciate you all being here. We have a pretty full agenda this morning, so I'm going to get right into it. Couple things, if for any members of the public who are here now and want to provide public comment later in the day, please put your name in the chat. And we have DLCD staff tracking that. Please keep yourself on mute if you're not speaking. You know, general guidelines in this Zoom era or virtual meeting era that we are in after the pandemic. Anything else? Let's see. Oh, OPAC members, please use the chat and or raise your hand if you want to make a comment. We will track those and call on you in the order that we see them in, I think. We also have on the screen, you'll see we have a couple people available for technical help and support. That's Amanda McNabb and Eva Krakowski. So before we get into introductions, Andy or Tara, do you have anything to add before we get into introductions?
Yeah, thank you, Susan. Just keep in mind, this is a Zoom meeting, so that gives everyone a little bit more control. But everyone has been great kind of in making sure that you are on mute. And do please keep in mind that anything that is in the chat is a part of the public record. So please be respectful when communicating via that method.
Yeah. Tara, anything to add before we get into introductions?
No, I think you covered it. Thank you, Susan.
Okay, thanks. So I'll start off. My name is Susan Chambers. I'm South Coast Fisheries Rep on OPAC and Chair. And I guess I will turn it over to Andy to run through our roster. It's kind of hard to tell. There we go. We have a slide. Andy's always on top of it. So I'll go to Tara.
Thanks, Susan. Tara Brock. I am Vice Chair and also the Coastal Conservation Representative here on OPAC. Happy Friday. I guess I'll pass it to Jamie, our other Executive Committee member.
Hello, Jamie Faraday, Public at Large, OPAC, Coos Bay. Nick.
Don't know if Nick is on here.
I do not see Nick Edwards yet.
Okay. I don't know if Margaret's on here. I don't have my participant screen up.
Sorry, I am Margaret Corby,
Okay.
OPAC Tribal Representative for the Coast.
Thank you, Margaret.
Richard Heap. I represent Charter Sport Fishing and Recreation in the South Coast, and I'm currently living in Lapine.
Okay.
Do we have Peggy? I see Peggy on the list. Peggy, I also see that you're muted, so maybe she's just stepped away for a moment.
Nope, here I am.
Oh,
I'm right
there
here.
you are.
Sorry, I was muted.
Hi, Peggy. Good
I
morning.
did my whole thing just to myself. Good morning, everyone. This is Peggy Joyce, Statewide Coastal Representative, Public at Large.
Wonderful. Good to see you, Peggy. Joe, Liebezeit.
Hey everybody, my name's Joe Liebezeit. I represent statewide conservation and environmental organizations on OPAC. Morning.
Morning.
Good morning, Bob Main, Coos Curry Douglas, Lane County Representative on OPAC and foam member.
Welcome, Bob. Amelia.
Good morning, everybody. Amelia O'Connor. I am the non-fishing recreation representative on OPAC.
Awesome. Let's see who else we have. Fran.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Fran Recht. I am an elected city official from Depot Bay, Oregon on the Central Coast.
Awesome. Okay, and then we have several ex officio council members. Ray, I saw you on here earlier.
I'm here, Ray Monroe. I'm the OCCMA delegate, representing coastwide small ports and local governments.
Welcome. Do we have Lisa or Laurel?
Good morning, everybody. Laurel Hillman, Oregon Parks and Recreation Department, sitting in for Director Assumption.
Good morning, Lisa Phipps, manager of the Oregon Coastal Management Program with the Department of Land Conservation and Development.
Welcome, Lisa. Okay.
Morning. Morning. Scott Groth, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife Marine Resources Program, Newport, Oregon.
Great. Karina.
Good morning, everyone. Karina Nielsen, Oregon Sea Grant at Oregon State University.
Welcome, Karina. Ryan. I don't know if he's here.
I do not see Ryan here this morning.
Okay. Do we have Blake Helm?
No Blake.
Okay, and I know Karen Power could not make it today. Do we have John Allen?
I do not see John.
Okay. Department of Agriculture, Alexis Taylor.
Nope. And I do not. Oh, I do see Steve.
Good morning, Steve Shipsey, Department of Justice, Counsel to the Council.
Wonderful. Chris Wall.
Chris could not make it today.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, I think that's it for our introductions. So if there's no other announcements, I'll turn it over to.
Can I do a quick staff intro?
Yeah.
Yeah. Andy Lanier, Marine Affairs Coordinator with DLCD. And we also have Amanda McNabb, Administrative Support, and Eva Krukowski, who's helping to support the meeting as well today.
Perfect. Thank you guys for all your work to make this meeting happen and keep us running smoothly.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay. Let's see. So next on our agenda, it looks like review and approval of the draft meeting summary. I'll turn it over to OPAC Vice Chair Tara to lead us through that.
Let me actually share a different screen because you did not get a draft meeting summary ahead of time. So what I'm going to do is walk you through the draft meeting summary that was just generated. Where is my... Okay. So this was not sent out ahead, but our last meeting was April 22nd. The one action the council took was to review the previous meeting summary and improve that without any edits. And then just a reminder of what we did go through. It was a meeting focused on introducing the concept of our roadmap and an update on Territorial Sea Plan Part 3. So the council had a lot of briefings. We had public comment, most of which associated with roadmap. And so what I will do is I will send this link out to everyone. I think what we need to confirm is that the attendance record is basically correct, and that would be the other details that need to be confirmed. So I don't know if we want to I can send that out as a link and we can go through an action towards the end, or what the council would like to do, but I apologize for not getting this out ahead of time.
Thanks, Andy. I think, yeah, giving council members maybe a few minutes to review it, send it out, and then if we can confirm attendance and maybe pick it back up just very briefly towards the end of the meeting.
Yeah, I think that works.
Yeah, that would be good.
Great, thank you all.
Yeah, I think you've been pretty busy, Andy, so I totally understand. But I think it's also brief enough that we can read through it and get back to it.
Great. Okay. So I think that would take us into the next agenda item, Susan.
Yes. Okay. And actually, I think that goes over to you because it's a recap of the OCMP CZMA public meeting and comments. I know you guys have been very busy meeting in Coos Bay and Newport and Brookings and other places and virtually.
Yeah, thank you. It has been quite a busy month as we prepared for and hosted at 1 virtual meeting and 4 in-person meetings on the coast. So what I would like to do today is to kind of recap that. I do want to thank all of the OPAC members who were able to attend either the virtual or in-person meeting events. But for those who weren't able to make it, the way that we conducted these events were, at least for the in-person, we had kind of an open house period of welcome, about half an hour, where we were able to greet everyone who kind of came in the door. We then began with a couple of presentations about why we were there, including a presentation on our offshore wind energy roadmap efforts and the fact that the state has been asked to lead the roadmap effort. And that was followed by an informational presentation on what our Federal Consistency Authority is and the review actions that were being considered. We then provided an opportunity for a clarifying question and answer session, and then went into a public hearing mode where we received comments from the communities. So that was the general structure of all of our events. And one of the things I do want to just highlight is I think the importance of the message that our roadmap work is really just beginning. And the state being directed through House Bill 4080, we have about a year, a little over a year to develop that roadmap, but then we have time following the roadmap to implement the actions that are identified through that mechanism that the state deems a priority for taking action on. And that would be for potential policy making efforts or rulemaking efforts that are identified by that mechanism. One of the examples that I've referred to is maybe taking a look at Part 5 of the Territorial Sea Plan again, because that was really developed for marine hydrokinetic energy as a focus and not offshore wind. But the message is that we will have time, maybe between 3 to 5 years of time for which the state can act to make sure that we have those enforceable policies in place prior to any construction and operations plan submission, which would be like the start of a real project application that would be the state's second opportunity for review. And I'm going to turn things over to Jeff to talk about that in more detail, because I want to make sure that we have a good understanding as a community about what this first review is and what a second review would be, and how the state does have the time between now and then in which to make sure that we have the policies in place that we want to have. So with that, Jeff Burright is joining me, and he will take over and talk about our federal consistency review.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Good morning, everybody. Yeah, I'm Jeff Burright. I'm the Coastal State Federal Relations Coordinator in the Oregon Coastal Management Program, where my primary role is to coordinate the federal consistency reviews of federal activities that have reasonably foreseeable effects to state coastal uses and resources. Andy, are you going to show slides, or should I run them on my machine?
Just tell me to advance them and I'll move forward.
Okay, I'm still only seeing the agenda on my screen.
That's interesting. I guess you weren't seeing these other slides that I thought I was sharing. So we do have some links. We do have our agenda. So apologies on that.
Okay, here we go. So when I'm going to start broad and talk about the process that we are following for the federal consistency review that we are conducting right now. And then, as Andy mentioned, I will focus on what is specifically being reviewed in this moment and how what is not being reviewed in this moment, as Andy mentioned, to provide some connective tissue to how the roadmap fits in. So under the federal consistency regulations, when we receive a consistency determination from a federal agency, that initiates our review, where we look at the action that they are describing that they would like to take. We look at the reasonably foreseeable effects of that action and how they are then compared to our enforceable policies. And we are required to issue a response within a certain number of days, whether we agree with the assertion of the federal agency that the action they want to take is consistent, or whether we object or have conditions. And I'll talk about that. So we received a consistency determination from BOEM on April 30th. That kicked off a standard 60-day review period under the regulations. But the regulations allow us to extend by 15 days, and that extension request must be honored. So we've already initiated that. BOEM has agreed. We have 75 days until July 14th. We also initiated a public comment period and extended that 15 days as well. And then, as Andy already talked about, we just recently completed our series of meetings along the coast as part of that public review period. We don't typically do that for federal consistency reviews, but this one was a topic for which we thought there was enough interest and enough desire to really engage with the topic and provide some feedback that we decided to do that. Just for some numbers, on the first day in Brookings, we had 72 participants. The next day in Coos Bay, we had 54. And then we had a down day. And Thursday, we met in Florence. We had 37 people. And Friday, we had 33 in Newport. And along the way, we also met with the city of Gold Beach and the city of Florence. So all of that completed. Now we're in the phase where the public comment period ends tomorrow, June 15th. We will then be looking through the feedback that we've received. We have been reviewing the action against our policies, discussing it within our agency network that's part of the Oregon Coastal Management Program. And then, Andy, if you'll advance to the next slide, please. At the end of our process, there will be 3 potential outcomes to our review. And I mentioned this prior. The first outcome would be a concurrence, where we essentially agree with BOEM that the action as proposed and its effects are consistent with our policies and may move forward. The second potential outcome is a concurrence with conditions. This is like a yes if decision, where we say you're almost there. However, there are some conditions that we need to see included with this action before we can give our concurrence that it's consistent. If you look at what's happened in other states, California recently, this has been a path that they have taken, and you can go read their decisions to see what kinds of conditions they required. It's a mix of kind of coordination on the activities that are going to be taking place out in the ocean. There are some specific restrictions on things that can and can't happen out there, like vessel speed limits or, buffer areas around sensitive habitats on the seafloor, that kind of stuff, as well as some like structural conversations, coordination requirements for fishery groups, local communities, tribes, so that kind of thing. The third outcome would be an objection. And in this case, it would be the state saying that upon review, we just cannot find the action be consistent with our policies. And that essentially puts a stop on the action unless the federal agency determines per their standards that the action is consistent to the maximum extent practicable and they can move forward. If they notify the state that that's the decision they're making. And then if the state is not satisfied, our remedy would be to challenge that in court. Next, please, Andy. And one more. I'm sure you have seen this image so many times that you're just so familiar with it, but just to put us in place, these are the dark areas, or the 2 wind energy areas that BOEM identified as a part of their multi-year process. And now the action they've proposed to us for this review is to issue leases within those dark blue areas. And then the effect of them taking that action is that the lessees who purchase leases within those areas would conduct survey activities to essentially study what they just bought. And those studies would be conducted toward the development of a project proposal, a construction and operations plan. And that would be that second opportunity, that second decision where they actually are proposing something. But at this stage, what we're really looking at is a lease and studies. Next, please. Here on the screen, you can see the BOEM process for reviewing and approving and installing an offshore wind energy facility. And then the 2 big yellow arrows are the state's opportunities in that process. The first arrow on the left is where we are today. That is our federal consistency review of the lease decision and the studies that would occur over the next 3 to 5 years post-leasing. The state gets a second opportunity to conduct a federal consistency review before BOEM approves a construction and operations plan. So it goes lease, studies occur, and development of a project proposal. That proposal is submitted to BOEM, and then BOEM has to check in with the state at that point. So it's at that second arrow, that second review opportunity, where we would expect to see a specific design proposal, more specific information about the environmental effects of actually building something. That's where I would look to see, a lot of the uncertainties and risks that people perceive for building a project. That second arrow is the point at which we would expect to see that information provided as essential input for us to make a decision whether the approval of a project can be found consistent with our policies. It was really important to keep clear what these 2 different decisions are. Next, please. So to put it in cartoon form, what we are looking at now, the scope of our present review, includes those activities in federal waters. So issuing a lease, and then within that lease block, we and BOEM expect that the lessees would install meteorological buoys, and those would be collecting oceanographic information, weather information. They would be on single point moorings, and there would be no more than 5 of them per lease. And then there would also be activities conducted from vessels. So there would be geophysical surveys, so side scan, sonar, and multi-beam, trying to map the bottom conditions. Where is their hard bottom? Where is their soft? Where can we identify habitats? That kind of stuff. There would then also be geotechnical surveys, also conducted from vessels, and that's stuff like collecting samples of the seafloor, maybe dropping penetrometers to find out the depth to bedrock in certain locations. And the purpose of that would be to identify places where they might be able to put foundation anchors for floating platforms, as well as to identify cable routes to get to shore. And then they would be doing biological surveys, looking at the potential effects to habitats and species from building. And then in federal waters between the lease block and the state jurisdiction line, there would also be those same kinds of vessel surveys because they would be seeking optimal cable routes to get to shore. So they'd be doing the geophysical, the geotechnical, and then the biological studies. So we get to review all of that and compare it against our policies. So we get to apply state policies in federal waters. We also get to review any effects in state waters that would result from what's happening out there in the federal waters. And really the one of greatest concern and interest would be vessel transit as boats are going back and forth. Next, please. This is a slide borrowed from a BOEM presentation, just showing you pictures representing what I just described: buoys, geotechnical samples, surveys of the seafloor. Next, please. There is another piece to this that we do expect would be an effect of issuing a lease on in federal waters, but that BOEM is saying is not within their jurisdiction and therefore is not within the scope of this federal consistency review. These would be, again, the same kinds of actions that they're talking about in federal waters. So operating from vessels, doing geophysical and geotechnical surveys, biological surveys, that kind of stuff. However, what BOEM has been telling us is because their authority is limited to the outer continental shelf, they don't have the ability to approve or deny activities occurring within state waters, or if there were survey activities happening on the shore as they're looking for horizontal directional drilling routes that could work. And so these activities we would catch later because anything that is disturbing the seafloor or having bottom contact would require a permit from the Army Corps of Engineers, and we have federal consistency review authority of that. There would also be requirements for scientific take permits from ODFW, for example, or ocean shore permits for anything that is happening on the beach. There would also be local, county, and city requirements that may take effect for anything happening onshore. So we will catch those, just not yet. Next, please. And I want to highlight that because of the scope of what we are looking at versus what we are not looking at, that affects the enforceable policies that we think we can bring to bear on this review. So we think the key enforceable policies include a handful of the statewide planning goals, most especially Goal 19. And then the implementation of Goal 19, as we know, comes from the Territorial Sea Plan, but we think that Part 2 is going to really be the key for this one. We also have statutes related to wildlife protection, commercial fisheries. We have a number of statutes and rules that relate to environmental quality generally, so air, water, management of wastes. We have policies as well related to archaeological resources that we are bringing into this review. Next, please. But there are certain policies that we don't think apply just yet, and that's because of the nature of what's proposed. Territorial Sea Plan Part 4 for subsea cables, because BOEM is not proposing to grant cable routes at this time, we don't think that applies yet. The designation of cable routes would occur at that second decision when there's a construction operations plan under review, and we would apply Part 4 then. Same thing for Part 5. Right now, there is not a facility being proposed. They're just proposing to do studies because it's not yet known whether a project would be subject to approval or denial. And so we're going to apply Part 5 at that second decision when we're actually required to consider a project itself. Same thing applies to ocean shore statutes, that because there are activities within BOEM's jurisdiction in this action that apply onshore, we don't apply those. And also local government plans and codes, because they don't apply out in the ocean, because they apply exclusively on land, we don't think apply to this action. However, next, please. I do want to just say, we don't think they apply yet, but at that second decision point of whether to approve a project, we think that all of these policies would be very significant to our review. And I think that's all I have this morning. So thank you for the time.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. So are there any questions on what Jeff or I just went through? And there was a request for me to go back to the slides that I thought I was sharing, but was not. So give me a moment and I will get back there.
Joe has a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation, Jeff. Isn't under the CZMA, DLCD required to review reasonably foreseeable direct and indirect effects on coastal uses? So wouldn't a reasonably foreseeable effect of the proposed leases also include their eventual full future development? And so therefore you might want to take into consideration TSP and 5 and other enforceable policies now rather than doing it piecemeal?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. As we understand it, this has been a conversation that other states have also had with BOEM and with the NOAA Office for Coastal Management as they have worked through this process ahead of us. And I think where the conversation has settled is that because there is that second opportunity to make a decision, it is not yet reasonably foreseeable because we have the opportunity to object at a later time. And that practically speaking, there are some benefits to identifying who the potential project applicants are, because that then focuses who will be investing in conducting those studies. So as opposed to having a dozen potential lessees out there all doing the same kind of overlapping activities, by narrowing it down to who is actually in the running, that arguably reduces your overall coastal effects. That's more just practical than legal, but yeah, where we have been interpreting it, where we have seen it play out in other states, is that just the way that I've described.
All right, thank you.
Peggy, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Jeff, that was very clear, and I much appreciate you going through that again. I think I'm finally getting the gist of what's happening here because it's so bloody complicated. And my question is, how likely is it, and what, as far as you know, has been the experience of other states who have gone through this with BOEM? Like California, I guess, is the only one on our side of the world. What happens to those big behemoth players who are going to get leases, who are putting in millions and millions of dollars into doing all of this advanced work and all of this research, and somebody comes up at the end of their period of time and says, no, sorry, we're not going to let you do that here? I mean, I wish we had the ability to do that, but I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure about any of this. But what happens when those players hit a road bump with the state and the state says, no, we don't want you to do that? Will they abide by? I mean,
Yeah. Thank you for that question. So when I described the three potential outcomes of a federal consistency review, and there was that objection, the rules of the objection are different at the stage where BOEM is taking an action, leasing the seafloor, versus that second decision where the decision is whether BOEM approves or denies a permit. So for that second decision, if the state were to object, there are a few things that are different. One, instead of the requirement that the applicant be consistent to the maximum extent practicable, they have to be fully consistent with our policies. And two, if the state is to object or were to object, then instead of being able to override us and then have us have to challenge them in court, if we object, the federal agency may not issue the permit. And then the only remedy for the applicant is to appeal the state's decision to the U.S. Secretary of Commerce. At that point, the U.S. Secretary of Commerce looks at the effects of the action versus the national interest and weighs them out, and then decides whether to agree with the state's objection or not. So a practical example is the Jordan Cove liquid natural gas facility that we reviewed a few years ago.
yeah.
The state ultimately objected under the CZMA to that action. The applicant appealed to the U.S. Secretary of Commerce, and the U.S. Secretary of Commerce upheld the state's objection. And so that project did not move forward. As I've heard it from NOAA, it's about 50-50 whether those appeals are successful or not. So as I look at the first decision here of whether or not BOEM and lessees want to enter into lease agreements, I look at that as kind of an action that they are voluntarily taking at risk, that they are going to invest some amount of money without any guarantee that it ultimately goes somewhere.
Okay, that's what I wondered. I wondered under what circumstances are they stepping into this and putting their money on the table and going through all of the expense and the time to do those studies? And are they then feeling like they have a place at the table? I mean, that's money talks. This is America we're talking about here. Thank you, Jeff, very much. I appreciate your all of your effort and your involvement in this project. It makes me feel more comfortable because you're very clear about what you've presented. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Peggy, for the question. That was a good question, and one that, this is a really difficult process to parse out what BOEM does, what the state can do, what developers will do. So I know it's taken me time listening to Andy and Jeff at the community meetings, reading all the documents. It's mind-blowing. So very good question. Does anybody else have questions from OPAC? I see we also have Nick Edwards here. Thank you for joining, OPAC member. I may have missed somebody else. Wow, we don't have any other questions? I think I may have one. Actually, I probably have a couple. Really dumb question, but through this consistency review, will DLCD look at any of the comments to BOEM on the EA or the proposed sale notice to see if there's any questions in there about, that people may have that may apply to the consistency review?
Thank you. That's a good question, actually. We've had a similar question at our public meetings, but it was related to the past comments that have been made to BOEM as they were developing the wind energy areas. with regards to comments happening right now, because there are 3 different comment periods that are going on in this moment. There's our federal consistency review, there's the environmental assessment under NEPA that BOEM is in charge of, and then there's also the proposed sale notice and the draft leases where you can actually go and look at their stipulations, and that is also subject to review. The way that we have been describing it is these are separate processes. Unless we receive a comment, it should not be assumed that we know what's going on there. However, we have been sent ODFW's comments on the environmental assessment, for example. We were given a courtesy copy of comments from the National Marine Fisheries Service on the environmental assessment. And so because those have been submitted to us, we are considering those in the context of our review as well. And I would offer that if you all see comments or had comments on those other documents that you believe should be considered as part of our review, please do send those along to us.
Thank you. I think that's very helpful. And I guess that was part of my question too, is because I know the Pacific Fishery Management Council is putting together a letter and sending you copies of our comments to BOEM on the EA and I believe the PSN, because the council just this week approved those. So that was kind of why I was asking. So I appreciate that. That's very helpful too, because I think there is some overlap. But at the same time, I would hate to see you guys comb through what's going to be probably hundreds of comments looking for specifics, just on your own. So I appreciate that. Steve Shipsy.
Yeah, and if someone were to be forwarding comments to the agency as part of for their review, it'd be helpful that included like a cover sheet or something that said, these are comments from so-and-so I'm forwarding because I think they interact with these enforceable policies of your review. So if you can highlight why, why you're providing the comments and tie them to things that are within the agency's review, that's beneficial.
Thank you, Steve. That makes a lot of sense. So I appreciate that. Does any other OPAC members have questions or comments for Andy or Jeff? Okay, in that case, I'm going to ask another question. Jeff, in your review of other states' consistency determinations, have you looked at the East Coast? I assume you have. You're nodding. So
Yeah.
Can you give us, I'm sorry for putting you on the spot, but can you characterize for us what some of those consistency determinations were? And, did any of the states object or, what they were like?
To my knowledge, no states have objected to the leasing decisions. I don't even think I've seen an objection to projects on the East Coast. We had an East meets West meeting just earlier this week that was hosted or convened by NOAA so that we could learn from our counterparts over in the East Coast states. It's the second one we've done of those. So we are doing some cross-pollination sharing. And a few of them sent me copies of recent determinations they've done. One I looked at just the other day was New York's. It was 4 pages long. It had like 2 conditions in it. And I'm trying to remember what they related to. It's past my mind right now.
It was a fisheries communication and liaison, I think, were one of them.
Right. Okay. So, and California, if you look at their example, they had, a dozen conditions. What I've been observing, however, is that in each successive BOEM proposal for lease, they are learning from what the states are putting in their conditions and successively adding those. So in the example of the fisheries liaison, the leases that were issued to California or the proposals, I don't believe had a fisheries liaison in them, and California required them. And now for Oregon's, they're in there at the base level. So they're adding things as they learn, but not everything. And so we have to go kind of compare what we've seen in the other states to make sure that nothing is falling off the plate.
Right. Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense because this is a very fast-moving learning process for anybody involved in coastal management, fisheries, tribes, you know, between the East Coast and the West Coast. So I appreciate that. And I'm glad that there is that kind of cross-pollination happening because I think that helps all of us. So. Okay. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Andy. Oh, Peggy, one more question.
I don't know if this is the time to ask this or not, but are you guys going to talk about what you heard from the community meetings that you just did this week? Last week? This week? Recently?
Sure, I think we can talk in general terms.
Okay.
But because our comment period is still open, obviously this is a high level, like major concepts. Certainly we did get a lot of comments that were generally opposed based upon the process. And those, while they are informative for us, are not necessarily helpful for us in our review of the enforceable policies. We did hear repeated messages of concern about impacts to marine mammals and marine species, generally marine birds in particular. So marine mammals and birds were a common thread of concern about potential impacts. And associated with that, whether or not the standard for a development is the same as a standard for an impact from, say, a fishery, as an example. So I heard comments like that. We heard comments about the need for having monitoring of the activities that were approved through the lease. So making sure that sound thresholds are being held to. So companies held to account when they're actually out there doing work. So that has led Jeff and I to think about conditions that would be in the line of trust but verify, so to speak.
Right. Yeah.
Jeff, what else high level did we hear? I'm racking my brain.
Those were the top ones I was going to mention as well, the monitoring of the actions, and then how do you structure it in such a way as to put some trust in the data collection. Several comments related to the process itself and the sequence of events. A lot of comments and concerns that we would be thinking about and applying at the project stage. And so even if those are not directly pertinent to the decision we have to make now, we're not going to lose those concerns. And those can be really informative if this moves forward. And I think you caught most of it there. There were some concerns about marine safety, that if you have an overall increase in vessel operations in the South Coast area, are the existing infrastructure, Coast Guard operations, et cetera, are those suited to the task? Which I thought was an interesting one.
I was surprised at how many people showed up in Brookings and how far it fell off by the time you got to Newport. It's just, wow. That's scary to me. It's like nobody's, like, we're all operating in the dark here. All right, thank you guys.
Thank you, Peggy. Good questions, and thank you, Jeff and Andy, for the answers and discussion. I don't see any other hands raised from OPAC members, so in an attempt to keep us on schedule, I would like to turn it over to Karina Nielsen to talk about the Oregon offshore wind energy research updates.
Great, thank you so much. Do I have permission to share my screen, Andy?
Give me one moment and then you will. Now you're good to go. Yep.
Okay, great. Right. And how does that look? Are you seeing what looks like a presentation opening
Yep.
slide? Okay.
Yes, it looks good.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I was tasked with consulting with our scientific and technical advisory committee, often referred to as STAC, and to basically do a rapid roundup, if you will, of offshore wind energy research activities happening in Oregon or relevant to Oregon. It's been busy. It's only been a couple of weeks. So just with that caveat in mind, I was able to round up quite a bit. It happened to coincide with some meetings happening at Oregon State University. Hold on, why isn't it advancing? Okay. Whoa, that is not the right slide. It went too fast. Let's try that again. Okay, here we go. So sources were our scientists on the Science and Technical Advisory Committee. There was an OSU offshore wind in Oregon kind of campus-wide discussion that we've had, it's an internal discussion to update folks and share research. Has happened for the last 3 years. So one just happened this past week. I requested input from OSU researchers who were at that meeting. And also did a quick scan of some of the online award databases for NSF and DOE with just some quick subject word searches for this state and offshore wind. So important caveats. This is a snapshot of what I know that is being done in Oregon or very relevant to Oregon. Is not comprehensive, right? There's a lot more going on probably. It's biased towards OSU because that's where I am and it was the easiest for me to get the information there. They are doing a lot of oceanographic and relevant ecology research. There is a lot of other organizations outside of Oregon, national labs, universities, et cetera, doing additional work that is probably and definitely relevant. So it's also a little hard sometimes, not all the relevant research, particularly baseline research or that you might use to compare what's happening now versus what might happen after an installation is not often tagged per se as offshore wind, but a scientist who would be looking for data to analyze sort of those kinds of impacts would know to go get it. But as somebody who's just trying to find the relevant research with a quick search, it's not that easy to pick it up, all of it. So with those caveats in mind, here we go with the roundup. I think some of you may have heard because it was in the news recently that there's a new consortium that was formed among some of these institutions outside of Oregon with Oregon institutions. It is, they have been calling themselves the Pacific Offshore Wind Consortium, or POW-C for short. It includes our own university here, Oregon State University, and the Pacific Marine Energy Center, specifically the Schatz Energy Research Center based in Humboldt at Cal Poly Humboldt, and the Cal Poly Center for Coastal and Marine Resources at Cal Poly SLO, San Luis Obispo. I mention this because there has been interest in seeing more science and West Coast specific, and this is just launching. It has a large advisory board. Oregon Sea Grant is part of it, along with California Sea Grant. Several representatives from tribal nations in California, and researchers from these. So pretty diverse advisory board and large. All right, so we're going to expect to probably see some things coming out of that. OSU, just for awareness, they just redid their strategic plan, and they have identified 4 focus areas for research growth. And 2 of those are related to offshore wind potentially, or could be encompassed, research projects might fall under these. So climate science and clean energy and related solutions. So they're looking, there is some interest in institutionally in pursuing those areas. There will be coming out on the street, as we say, soon, and notice funding for these kinds of research activities from the Department of Energy. So we expect this announcement with competition for funding any day now. People are scientists are refreshing their screens, looking to see if that money has come out. Of note, relative to the slide I just showed you, there is a call for a floating offshore wind center of excellence. And I know that the POWC consortium intends to pursue that funding opportunity. I would say that just looking at where else might be eligible for such funding, the Maine, has put a lot into some floating offshore wind pilot research. And so, I don't know if there'll be a collaboration or if, that might be a competitor for this fund. So just to give you a sense of what's out there, that's a lot of money, invest in studies. Okay. In Oregon, Oregon-based offshore wind energy research projects that I'm going to present to you that are active, relevant, and currently underway. So they fall into a variety of topical areas. There's research underway in social science and human dimensions, focused on marine ecology, focused on marine wildlife. There's research on related to fisheries, oceanography, engineering, and supply chain and manufacturing. So quite a diverse array of thematic areas. I'm going to start with some student work. Students are very interested in this topic. It's an active area of policy debate. There's a lot of science involved, a lot of innovation involved. So of course, students are interested in this area. It's just a wonderful area for them to kind of understand how all these different pieces fit together. Professor Hilary Boudet leads a Master's of Public Policy capstone research course. And for their project this year, that group of students did a qualitative analysis of the public comments that were submitted to BOEM. So, several hundred of them. Andy and Jeff, you may want to get in touch with them, see what they've learned. Major themes that they picked up from those public comments and identified as sort of the top themes were about ecology, economic development, inefficiency concerns, climate change concerns, and concerns about whales. I don't think that would be a big surprise. From the public comments, so the perceived gaps in knowledge from folks who were commenting, included impacts on whales and birds, infrastructure and hazard interaction. So, Cascadia subduction zone and the offshore wind infrastructure, and impacts on the California current and upwelling. So I think that's kind of makes sense, resonates for those of you who have been following the public comment. So more on that. Dr. Hilary Boudet is also involved in several other human dimension social science research projects that are active right now. One is related to the PACWAVE project, and although PACWAVE is focused on the wave energy testbed facility, they have been doing social science research on the perceptions of marine renewable energy development. And they have added in, surveys about wind energy, offshore wind energy, just because everybody's, it's easy actually to do it at the same time. So they're getting information on both. They've been doing surveys in this year in Oregon, Washington, California. They have been doing interviews in Oregon, and they anticipate having a white paper and public presentation on the results of those research coming out this fall. So look forward to seeing that. They also received a large grant together with her colleague Sean Hasboon at OSU from the Department of Energy to study the community benefits from offshore wind development. They're doing interviews, case studies, and surveys on the West Coast and also in Maine, and that study will go through 2026. They're looking at community perspectives on potential benefits of offshore wind development, kind of to local economies, rural communities. They will be producing a community benefits information and toolkit for communities to use to be more prepared to talk with developers potentially, if that's the route they're going to go. And they're just trying to understand how these things play out. So a lot of partners on that. Marine ecology. There's a fair amount of marine ecology research going on. 3 sort of projects that I wanted to call your attention to. One, 2 of them current. One from a while back when offshore wind first showed up to Oregon. So Effects Sarah Hinkle is leading this research along with, she's also working closely with Taylor Chappell and Kyle Newton, also at OSU. They're looking at the effects of altered electro and geomagnetic fields on the behaviors of crabs and skates. So EMFs and GMFs. This is particularly the question is, you know, could the electromagnetic fields impact organisms that use magnetically based navigation? Would it influence their navigation behavior? This is funded from a variety of funding sources, and some of those results are coming out soon. By the way, I'm not going to be able to summarize all like whatever 20 research projects that I have. We want to know more. We can invite those scientists to speak to you directly. So, you know, don't test my abilities here too deeply. But know that work is going on. They wanted to remind, Sarah wanted to remind everyone that, you know, there have been some benthic habitat characterization work done before, similar to what is likely to go forward in the work by leasees if they, you know, do their site assessments and perhaps additional work. So benthic habitat characterization. So back in 2013, when Principal Power was proposing an offshore wind pilot off of Coos Bay, Sarah, along with funding and colleagues from BOEM and USGS, were involved in surveying and characterizing those proposed lease blocks. So some images there from that work, and it's in shallower water, but it might be along cable, you know, could be relevant to cable routes and that sort of thing. It's shallower than the proposed lease areas right now. In addition, currently, Packwave South, they are going to be installing cable, and Sarah has been working on the effects of cable installation on the benthos. They're doing box core surveys. You can see a picture of that at the bottom. I actually took that photo. I got to go out on the boat and help with one of those. We had students out doing some of that work on one of the cruises this spring. So that was nice to go and see. Again, this is shallower, but relevant, and they'll go back and resurvey. So learning a lot about those habitats. So that's what's going on there. There is a very large study on marine mammals and seabirds. This would this is intended to provide baseline and understanding who's out, where, when. The goal of the research, so this is the Marine Offshore Species Assessment to Inform Clean Energy, and all excellent science projects always come up with a wonderful acronym, so they're calling themselves MOSAIC. The team at the Marine Mammal Institute and collaborators from Cascadia Research Collective are active on this project. They have just basically, I think, wrapped up the majority of their field surveys. That's sort of the phase 1 of the project. The summary graphic on the right gives you a sense of all the different kinds of work that they're doing. So it's not just visual surveys, but they're collecting photo IDs, they're tagging and doing little skin biopsies to get DNA information, all kinds of things. Phase 2 will be analysis and products, and you can see the team there, funding coming from DOE, in collaboration with BOEM and NOAA. So those results will be very informative. And we look forward to hearing more about those. So let's see. Fisheries research, I can share that Dr. Francis Chan, also at OSU, has just received funding through a NOAA Special Projects Fund to do vulnerability assessment for Oregon fisheries related to floating offshore wind. I know those funds are still being kind of like stuck in the machine, so he hasn't started the work quite yet, but that project will be starting soon. So look forward to hearing about that. In terms of oceanography, there's quite a there's some studies that have been done in California. Jack Barth kind of presented this work. He's from OSU, just a summary for us at this meeting. Two major papers modeling upwelling impacts to in locations in California. I think were modeled primarily. Some conclusions from that work on the right. On the left, recently a National Academy's evaluation study on the hydrodynamic impacts of offshore wind in Nantucket. Now remember, that's fixed bottom, so it's going to be different in terms of how those physical dynamics play out. But they're looking at the evaluation from wind to waves. The main takeaway from that one is that it's going to be likely difficult to distinguish the impacts of the wind farms from the significant impacts of climate change and other influences on the ecosystem. So their takeaway is that study and monitoring of the oceanography and ecology of the area is ongoing, is going to be necessary to try and get a handle on what's going on. The other thing from the California upwelling studies, remember, these are simulations, these aren't actual empirical measurements. This is modeling work. The conclusions of those studies primarily were that there is reduced upwelling on the inshore side of wind farm arrays, increased upwelling on the offshore side. This mixing up of the variation in upwelling is different from what we see naturally, so it's outside the bounds of natural variability, but that the net upwelling in a wide coastal band changes relatively little. So because one side's up, one side's down, they kind of cancel each other out when you look across a broader space. That doesn't mean there aren't impacts. It's just the way it adds up. And the consequences is just physical changes. We don't know how those play out in the ecosystem. There are other oceanographers at OSU, Jessica Garwood, who's working and interested in floating, the influence of floating wind farms on ocean perturbations. This is work actually done probably with funding that the student had to come visit from France. I don't know that for sure, but this was by a master's student working in her lab. She presented it at the conference. Another numerical simulation looking at the impacts of the floating platforms themselves and sort of how they present obstacles in flow, and trying to understand how those affect mixing in the water column. So I don't know enough about that study or the conclusions, but it's the start of building a model that could be useful to compare to reality. And even you can layer on, for example, this is all sort of physics. You could layer on phytoplankton, zooplankton models and start getting some predictions of what those perturbations might do. See, I know a little bit about some of them. Just don't ask me too many deep questions. Jonathan Fram at OSU, who's involved with the Ocean Observatories Initiative. It's a big NSF initiative, but there is, they fund mooring and glider lines that are run regularly off the Oregon coast. And he contacted me to say, we've been doing this for a while. We have a lot of data. We've been prioritizing the Newport and Grays Harbor hydro lines, but we can switch. We do have some data and some regular visitation, although not as intensive, to the Coos Bay line. He thought the Coos Bay line could be relevant. They currently have probably about 1 to 2 months of data every year since 2015, roughly. Some years a little more, some years a little less. So, but that's, it's not the intensity with which they're surveying these other areas with moorings and gliders. Can reprioritize, so and offered to be available should the scientific community ask them to do that. So they don't have to be inside OOI to ask for that reprioritization. Engineering. Lot of interest in developing real-time hybrid offshore wind modeling at the PMEC, the Pacific Marine Energy Center, in combination with using our Hinsdale Wave Research Laboratory. I'm not sure how many of you are aware of that, but there's a very terrific, outstanding facility on the OSU campus that allows for that. And the hybrid modeling is to kind of proposing to look at not just the in-water effects, but how those interact with atmospheric effects. and how to model that at a scaled down version. So some innovation around how to do that. And as I was making the presentation, looking for an image, and lo and behold, I learned last night that this funding from the BIL Act had come into for marine energy research to the Pacific Marine Energy Consortium, so 5.5 mil. So that's hot news, I guess. Anyway, a lot of capabilities in these facilities here. There's also, I found in my searching, DOE has funded a supply chain manufacturing award here in Oregon, focused on fabricating tension leg floating offshore wind turbine platforms. The lead on that is Alicia Chapman with Willamette Technical Fabricators. There's several phases to that research. The main objectives are to develop this robotic welding system to reduce the costs and the time to make that scale it to be more cost competitive and to improve the possibilities for manufacturing those tubular structures here in the United States. So that is underway as well. And national academies are on this, a lot of study, very high-level scientists involved with that, including our own Jack Barth from OSU in terms of West Coast folks. There's two committees there, James Sanchirico from UC Davis, so that's California, Stephen Joner, I believe, Macaw consultant. Those are just West Coast faces, if you will, or individuals on those panels. And that is your quick roundup, and I'm happy to take questions or try and, we can have a discussion. I'll try and answer.
Wow, that was a lot. Thank you.
I think one of the things to know is that I think people weren't sure. I don't know how aware folks were of the breadth and number of studies just being done in Oregon and the sort of the capacity we have. So hopefully that helped at least give you a sense.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. I mean, I know there's been a lot of funding made available, so that's nice to see that Oregon's getting some of that and that what studies are being done. So I'll turn it over to Joe for a question, followed by Peggy. Joe, go ahead.
All right, thank you. Thanks so much, Karina. That's really impressive to see all the research going on. I was going to ask a bit more about kind of a level above that, maybe, of oops, I just heard the recording go off and on, of how to kind of direct that research to being used for adaptive management. And I know there have been a number of comments through the years, literally, to BOEM and others on considering the development of like an independent interdisciplinary science committee to kind of look at all the science, figure out where the gaps are, and vet it, because right now a lot of the science that we're looking at is performed by BOEM or contracted through BOEM. So I just wanted to get your perspective on that. There is a specific recommendation, actually, when I reviewed the roadmap document that we're going to talk about today. On page 28, there's a bullet: consider establishing an independent interdisciplinary science committee to provide independent synthesis of best available science to identify knowledge gaps on relevant technical and scientific questions, including review and analysis of monitoring data and making recommendations for adaptive management. So I know there are other places in the country, like I think on the East Coast, where there's a regional wildlife science collaborative that's academics as well as NGOs and others that are kind of taking that role of trying to vet and the work that's going on for offshore wind there. So I wanted to get your perspective on that. You mentioned the Pacific Offshore Wind Consortium. I wonder if that's an entity doing that already or not.
I think they aspire perhaps to be that. They just formed. I think they're still seeking funding. Part of, giving yourself a name and establishing yourself. They have some funding. They're trying to establish a diverse portfolio of funding. I know that, so that they don't get have any perceptions of working for any one particular sector, if you will, in this space. I do think that, these are a lot of, if you think about how scientists work, they hear a question that's interesting from a technical perspective, or they hear about policy issues where they have expertise that they feel like they can contribute. They can only do so much with no money, and with students, you have to support the students. They don't work for free. And so they look for funding. Well, the funding's coming from DOE, from foundations, from industry. So of course they're going to go get that funding. Is anyone asking them or charging them or paying them to synthesize it all into answering a specific policy question? I have certainly at this conversation with OSU researchers, we presented on the roadmap, we presented policy, Jeff presented there, and Jason Searman from OE presented there. I presented. We're trying to get them to have an awareness of what the policy and community questions are. There's a lot of interest in trying to be more transdisciplinary, but finding the opportunity to do that and to have a specific charge, like what is the real policy question that needs to be answered, or that would be helpful to inform, like the concerns that folks have in these environmental assessments, for example. I think that needs to be crystallized, right? So I'll just say that, I think there are some opportunities to do that.
Thanks, Karina. Well, I'm interested in putting a motion forward for OPAC to direct STAC to, I think what you've done is great as a start for, really looking at the research just in Oregon, but the bigger question of how do we guide management over a longer term, and maybe even looking at what other states are doing. I'm interested in a motion, if it makes sense to others, to direct STAC to kind of do an exploratory analysis like that, and provide OPAC at some point in the future like a report or something on different ways we can kind of move down that road of establishing an interdisciplinary science committee to really move forward on what we're talking about. So I don't know if anyone else on OPAC has any other thoughts on that, or go ahead.
Could I just, I know that as part of the roadmap development, there is an intention to form an advisory council or committee. I don't know if Andy or Jeff want to speak to, I'm not sure. I just thought I'd point that out, that there, we only have so many people in Oregon with technical expertise, and, just maybe there's some merging of that work or connectivity between those bodies of work. Consider.
I'll just respond to say that I think research and understanding Oregon's desire for research, specifically because we are, perched in a unique place on the West Coast, and we may have very particular types of concerns because of our location in the Eastern Pacific. I think there's a role for highlighting what those important questions are and kind of prioritizing those for our scientists. I don't think we've had that discussion. And I would like our roadmap group, and I haven't given them a name yet, Karina, so I'm certainly not sure even what we are calling them. But I think that is something that I want to have a conversation around before we do kind of task stack with something that they may not have the full picture or scope or scale yet to really effectively address the question, right? So I do want to be careful in how we call STAC into action, but I do think there's a role for Oregon scientists to help inform us as to what those questions are and how the state can build capacity to begin to address them.
I would also just add, just for the council's consideration, STAC has not had a charge for some time. The last big project they did was the Marine Reserves. I am aware of at least 2 members who are rotating off or termed out and need to do other things. So we would need to, I think, well, there's 2 routes to go just structurally if you want to do this. One is I'm going to have to replace those empty seats. refill them, there's a formal nomination process, so that's fine. I think we can target specific areas of expertise for those nominations if we wanted to. STAC also has the ability to convene ad hoc working groups or something of that ilk. And so that might be another route to go without having to build out the stack for this purpose specifically. So just wanted to give some options there that might be worth considering.
Great. Thank you, Karina, Joe, and Andy for those thoughts. Peggy, I'll get to you in a second, followed by Fran. I just want to remind you that we are running a little bit behind schedule, but I want to take your questions. So we will take a break after this. But after that will be public comment. So anybody on the webinar who is interested in public comment, please put your name into the chat and we will have staff track those so we get an idea of how much time we have. So please do that. And then I'll go to Peggy for a question.
So Joe, do you have a motion on the floor that didn't get seconded? Because I would second that as long as we can, as Karina said, adjust it for STAC being a part of that proposal, which I think is really important to do.
If I can chime in really quick before
Yeah.
Frank goes, I understand, Andy, but I also feel like we can't lose this thread, and
Right.
we need to have a plan before we end this meeting for how we're going to proceed on that and potentially engage STAC and put that in writing somewhere. So that's my thought on that.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Peggy, for that. I do want to remind us that we do have a discussion session this afternoon that is designed to discuss all of what we hear today, including, you know, regarding recommendations or actions. So Joe, if you can hold off on that and bring that up again during the discussion this afternoon. Because I do want to hear from the public and give them a chance to chime in on anything they've heard before we get into discussion and action. So if we can hold those ideas and then we'll get into that later. Andy, Peggy, Joe, does that sound like a plan?
Okay, yeah. What time are we talking about here, Susan?
It was the, I think, 11 o'clock agenda item.
Oh, okay. All right, great. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Fran, go ahead.
So I may have missed it, but we're talking about studies, and I know in the past we've required developers to do certain studies, and I'm wondering if somehow the task of the STAC or whatever group we might set up or that's already working would identify those studies that might be appropriate to condition, you know, Beaumont or the developers to get done. So identify gaps in knowledge that could be filled or could be paid for, you know, could help pay for the studies needed. And maybe that was already addressed, but we can discuss that later. Thank you.
Thank you, Fran. Was that addressed? I missed part of it, so I guess I'll look to Karina and Andy to see if there was discussion about that I missed.
Andy and I were chatting about something on the chat. I don't know. I didn't hear what the question was. I'm sorry.
No worries. Fran, can you repeat that real quick?
I was wondering if one of the roles of a group set up, or maybe it's already been done, is to identify those types of studies that we could condition BOEM
okay.
to do, or to pay somebody else to do. You know, prioritize those things that we think the research that's needed to, you know, make a decision, or have the wind energy developers help us to gather the needed data. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly feasible. You know, POWSI, I think, is kind of hoping to do that. They have developed a way to put kind of like a firewall between where the money comes and, you know, not have strings to it. Goes into a gift fund that doesn't have any contractual obligations. So it like Kelsey can do whatever they want with it. I mean, like, that's the way they structured the money they got so far. Something like that could potentially, you know, be a way forward.
Yeah, I would just say that I would be careful in how we would describe that, because I don't think that we can have any sort of condition that would require a certain entity to receive funds. It would be that a study would have to be completed, and that would be dictated or determined at a later time by a different entity.
Right.
Sorry, thank you, Andy. Tara?
Thanks. I know we need to move on. I was just going to, some of what Fran just said, support that. I think there is a role for SAC here. I think even a basic report to us, as you know, using some of the information that Karina just presented of what is going on the West Coast, what are all the various entities and what their roles are or what they hope to be. And then where, sort of as Fran said, where the STAC sees gaps that need to be filled, and then a proposal for how STAC feels they could help fill those gaps if they think they're the right entity to do so. So that's sort of like even just a report to the council of like, here's what's going on. Because I think even though many of us might be digging in on this, there's so many things going on that it's hard to keep track of. So your overview is excellent, Karina, but like getting a report from SAC of kind of here's everything going on the West Coast, and here's where we see the gaps and where we could plug in would be really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I this was just a snapshot, right? There's a lot more, and it takes time to do that work. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Karina. Any last questions before we take a break and then move into public comment?
Karina has something that she wanted to share before we go into break.
Okay. Awesome.
Just real quick, because this afternoon we are holding a webinar. If you haven't had enough time in a virtual meeting today, please join us at 1 o'clock. Oregon Sea Grant is sponsoring a webinar on community benefit agreements. It will be taped. We will share the link. You can watch it later. You don't have to come at 1 if you're, done with being in the virtual environment. It will include Matilda Crater from NREL, National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and Catherine Hoff from UC Berkeley Center for Law, Energy, Environment. They've done a lot of analysis of community benefit agreements, might be helpful for public comment for the proposed sale notice, just for you to have a better understanding what those could or could not be. So that was it. And the link is there. If you want to go, you can use the QR code to get it. And I'll put the link in the chat too, if you need the link.
Perfect. Thank you, Karina. I'd forgotten to mention that earlier, so I'm glad you brought that up because I plan on being there as well. Community benefit agreements are certainly something that we should be interested in. So I appreciate that. Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands. So, and I don't have the chat box open. So Andy, how many people do we have interested in public comment?
I saw 2. Am I muted? Hold on a sec. Nope, I'm not muted. I saw 2. But I'm
Eric?
guessing we're gonna have a few more.
It looks like Eric Riston and Charlie Plybon, and I'm kind of keeping track.
Okay, so I think we have time still if we take a 10-minute break and come back. Let's take a 12-minute break, come back at 10:15 for public comment.
Great.
Does that work?
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank
We
you.
can reconvene at 10:15.
Perfect. Hey, I think we're starting to get some people back. You can give us a thumbs up in the chat or turn on your camera. We'll get started again. Awesome. Getting a lot of OPAC members. I haven't looked at the chat lately. So Andy, how many people do we have?
We have 2 people.
I thought there was a third.
Um,
Yeah, I missed
sorry,
it.
my Zoom just crashed again, so I lost the list that Amanda McNabb was sharing. So Mandy, can you go ahead and put that list back in the chat for us? Eric Kristen is first, followed by Charlie
Okay.
Plyman.
Okay, so I guess there is only two. I see Eric is here. So Eric, go ahead.
Thanks.
Welcome.
Thank you. And thanks for the chance to comment today. My name is Eric Riston. I am the Coastal Law Project Attorney at Crag Law Center. I'm here to testify today on behalf of the Oregon Shores Conservation Coalition regarding OPAC's recommendations for DLCD's consistency review for the proposed offshore wind energy areas. As a Territorial Sea Plan Part 1 recognizes, informed decision-making is the heart of Oregon's ocean policy. In the action that DLCD is currently reviewing, BOEM is proposing to lease large areas of ocean for wind energy development without any life cycle analysis of the effects of that development. That kind of uninformed decision-making is clearly contrary to the detailed system laid out in Oregon's enforceable policies for siting renewable energy. Accordingly, we are recommending DLCD object to the consistency review at this time and urge OPAC to do the same. In its consistency determination, BOEM impermissibly decided that multiple relevant Oregon enforceable policies, including the Territorial Sea Plan Parts 3, 4, and 5, do not apply to this action, and thus provided DLCD with no information to review them for consistency. Most remarkably, BOEM decided that the Territorial Sea Plan Part 5, the purpose of which is, quote, to identify the appropriate locations for renewable energy development, does not apply to this consistency review because it is only a lease and applicants will have to apply for construction and operation permits at a later stage. That decision is plainly contrary to the text of the TSP Part 5, which explicitly includes leases as a covered authorization. TSP Part 3 and TSP Part 4 must also be applied here because the foreseeable effects of this project, as required to be reviewed under the CZMA, plainly implicate them. In addition to failing to apply required enforceable policies, BOEM failed to conduct the environmental analysis required by the TSP. Even if the TSP Part 5 does not apply, both the TSP Part 2 and Part 5 independently require a detailed resource inventory and effects analysis of all reasonably foreseeable adverse effects of the proposed actions, including the cumulative effects of the project combined with effects of probable future projects. Despite these requirements, so far BOEM has limited its environmental analysis of the proposed leases to the effects of site assessment within the project areas, impermissibly excluding site assessment for cable corridors extending to the shoreline, the effects of future construction and operation, and the cumulative effects of this project combined with other similar projects along the West Coast. All of these aspects are clearly probable future projects, if not a part of the same project here, and thus must be considered prior to leasing. As the California Coastal Commission acknowledged in its consistency review for the Morro Bay wind energy area, the leasing stage, oh, sorry, I see I'm out of time. I'll just finish off by saying that, without taking these actions, reviewing this seriously, Oregon is going to be rushing alongside BOEM to irrevocably commit our ocean resources to a new industry without a thorough analysis of the impacts. Thank you again for the chance to comment.
Thank you, Eric. Much appreciated. Any questions for Eric? Okay, I'm not seeing any. So I'll go on to Charlie, followed by Mike Okaneski.
Looks like there was a
Susan.
question from
Looks like Lisa had her hand up.
Yep.
I believe.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I was struggling with my icon this morning. I would encourage everybody who provides public comment today during this meeting to also provide written comment in advance, so by the end of tomorrow. So to make sure that all the nuances are captured, and you lost your time, like you ran out of time, Eric. So just to make sure everything you wanted to get said is said in written form. And thank you, Chair, for allowing me to say that.
Yes, of course. Very good ideas. Okay, let's see. Okay, Charlie, followed by Mike O. Charlie, go ahead.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we got you.
Okay, I apologize. I'm going to keep my camera off. I'm having unstable internet messages here. So
No
thanks.
worries.
For the record, my name is Charlie Plyben. I'm the Oregon Policy Manager for Surfrider Foundation, and I appreciate the opportunity to testify today. I have 3 recommendations for the council to consider for potential action today. One, I think the council should make a recommendation to specifically include recreation and tourism in the state's key objectives for protection in the offshore wind roadmap. Recreation is a protected use under the state's Goal 19 and has been an instrumental ocean stakeholder in the state's ocean planning efforts to date. The industry represents one of the most significant portions of the state's blue economy and associated ocean sector GDP, contributing over $2.4 billion annually to our state's economy. Early spatial and economic use studies, both offshore and nearshore for recreation, are imperative to conduct prior to leasing to determine a baseline and measurable impact following leasing activities. Second, I think the council, and I apologize, I missed Karina's presentation this morning, and it may be informing this comment a little bit better, but the council should make a recommendation to direct STAC to summarize and collate existing offshore wind research for Oregon and West Coast and report on any potential mechanisms for housing a state or West Coast research hub and science body for offshore wind. At the state level, such a scientific hub could flow through STAC appointment, and funds could be housed potentially through existing bodies like the state's Oregon Ocean Science Trust. Third, the council should make recommendation to the governor's office to protect existing nearshore ecological and biological monitoring within the state agency budgets now more than ever. The Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife is proposing a budget today in front of their commission to remove Oregon's only long-term ocean ecological and biological ocean monitoring funding to support a position to help further development and siting of offshore wind. These are the marine reserve investments for monitoring that this body recommended and passed through the legislature just this year, and they are already being proposed to be swept and reallocated to support a bureaucratic position for the state agency to engage in offshore wind. Oregon's priority in the siting of offshore wind and the responsibility of the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife should begin with protecting our statutorily and Goal 19 protected uses and natural resource assets, managing and monitoring Oregon's nearshore marine reserves, protected areas, monitoring our priority habitats should be elevated at a time of development offshore consideration, not diminished. Thank you so much for this opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Charlie. Any questions for Charlie? Okay, I'm not seeing any right away, so I'll go to Mike Okaneski. I see you're on the phone, so if you want
I
to
see a
hit
hand
star
raised.
9.
Susan, this is Peggy. I just wanted to make sure that Charlie would post his comments. Will you, Charlie? Can you put them in the chat or something so that we have some record of what you've just suggested?
Sure, I'm happy to do that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Peggy. Mike Okaneski, go ahead.
Mike, we are not hearing you. Try star 9 on your phone to unmute.
Can you hear me okay?
There you are. Yes.
I had to use star 6, not 9. I don't know why, but anyway, my name's Mike Okaneski. I'm with the West Coast Pelagic Conservation Group. I spent 50 years in the processing side, still involved with 3 advisory bodies on the council and a few other things. But offshore wind, I got my first exposure to it about 6.5 years ago when I was in MAFAC. And what I heard didn't seem like it could really interfere with fishing that much, but our prime concern is, well, actually our prime concern is what's going to happen to the ecosystem when you start putting up more and more turbines. And it seems like there is research going on, and we're happy to see that. But on the other hand, I don't know that you can really point this down to the fine specs without having some form of empirical data to work with. The two items that are heaviest on our list would be upwelling, which you discussed a little bit already. And the second one is what's going to do to the phytoplankton. And I'm not an expert, but as I understand, it's like the base of most all the food in the ocean. So I think these kind of studies do need to be done. And I think we have to slow down and do the experimental or use Morro Bay or one of those to get some kind of data that informs us what to expect as we put this together, or as BOEM puts it together. Right at this point, we're just opposed to offshore wind, period, until they have a different approach to it. One thing I don't know is within your purview or not that needs exploration is the costing to the consumer. It started out at one level, and even on the East Coast, and as many of you know, I think it's about 7 to 9 contracts have been breached back there. And some of them have been restarted again, but at a much higher power exchange rate than what they had. In addition, there's been one, as I understand, 25% increase in the tax credits. That still is money coming out of somebody's pocket. It's up to 40% now for capital expenses. So I think if you can do that, it'd be nice to inform your citizens or residents in Oregon and how much you're going to have to pay for electricity, because our estimation is it's going to be a lot higher than anybody expected. And thank you for the time, and appreciate the meeting. Excellent comments, by the way, by Charlie and I think Eric. So thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Any questions for Mike? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Andy, do we have any other public comment requests that I missed in the chat?
I do not see any hand raised or any requests for comment, and any additional requests. So,
right. Okay, well, perfect timing. That takes us to our next agenda item, which is the Oregon Offshore Wind Roadmap. Is that what you have on the screen? Yes. Okay. Yep. So I was wondering if, Andy, if you could provide a little introduction to this about where we are with the roadmap now.
Sure. Yeah, let me
probably have that on a slide because you're thinking way ahead of me.
Just one moment. I will pull up the slide that I was intending to show earlier about the timing and about the roadmap implementation relative to a real project being proposed. The other thing I have is some slides from the roadmap consideration. I have the roadmap considerations document open, and some of the slides from the panel presentation that were presented to OPAC in April, if we want to go back to those. But let me first share my screen. Okay. Are you seeing a slide that has the timeline of after leasing regulatory? Yes. Right?
Yep.
So the way this slide is organized is that activities of a lessee are on the top, and our federal consistency reviews as well. And the BOEM actions are kind of on the bottom, at least on that, the blue horizontal timeline with the circles on it for approximate points in time. And so there is, after a lease is issued, a lessee will create a plan and submit that plan to BOEM for their proposed activities with site assessment and site surveying. As Jeff mentioned, he went through what those are likely to be. And we think that there's going to be 3 to 5 years of time before the state has to have our enforceable policies in place ahead of an actual project being submitted. And that is the time period within which, when I talk about roadmap development and implementation, that's kind of our window of opportunity to get our ducks in a row, so to speak, for Oregon. And the first, year of time is going to be doing the comprehensive engagement and the development of that roadmap. So following on from the considerations document that was generated by the informal offshore wind working group, the state has the responsibility of doing that engagement and developing the roadmap, and then following through on the things that are identified in that roadmap is the implementation phase, right? And those could include studies, it could include rulemaking amendments, either for offshore or onshore related policies, plans, administrative rules. So those are going to be kind of, the roadmap will provide direction for the state on which actions or activities it wants to embark on in an implementation phase, right? And we're kind of in a race between now and a project submission, as I see it. So that is the overall big picture of a roadmap. I could go back in and pull up a different slide deck that may have more specifics, but since the passage of the legislation in March, we really have been almost completely consumed by responding to our federal consistency role. And we recognize that our public is also wanting to participate fully in not only our review and comment process, but in the BOEM process as well. So, the 3 ongoing comment opportunities that Jeff mentioned are taking all of the capacity that I think we have as stakeholders and agencies to respond. That has meant that we have not made progress on the roadmap except for some general conceptual high-level thinking in what those actions or activities are going to be. And just to summarize briefly what those are, they will include the establishment of a work group that is advisory to us, that is in line with kind of what the informal group was. So an opportunity to continue to listen and learn from the many different perspectives that are important to us on this issue. And one of the first actions or activities that will be associated with that is a nominations process. So allowing individuals to self-nominate in different kind of representative seats so that we can have that broad base of understanding. So that's one action, is the creation of a group to help advise us. Tribal consultation will also be ongoing and behind the scenes, but we would also welcome tribal participation on that advisory group if they so choose. But they have the ability to have a separate lane with the state, given their sovereign roles. Additionally, we are envisioning The kind of additional comprehensive engagement being other in-person community meetings, focus groups, potentially survey focused on roadmap topics, and potentially other activities, but those yet have really not been fleshed out and developed. And we envision beginning those activities, both work group actions and then following engagement later this, early this fall, basically beginning on that. And we did just find out that we got the position approvals through the review process, and we will be posting those very soon. So we have two full-time permanent positions that are going to be advertised at DLCD to work on the enforceable policies assessment associated with offshore wind and the roadmap project coordinator. So very excited to have those maybe out on the street as early as a week from now. Given that we need the help on board to really give us capacity to do a good job on this work for the state. So that is a high-level summary of kind of our directive as an agency to move forward on our roadmap work. Maybe I'll pause there to see if Jeff and or Lisa want to provide anything additional that I may have forgotten in that summary.
Andy, I think you covered it, but I'd be curious to know if people have questions.
Yeah. I see Peggy raised her hand.
I don't know why I'm not seeing that on my screen.
I saw her physically raise her hand.
I only waved.
Physically, okay,
I did the old fashioned way.
I'm all confused. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. That was a very good overview, and I appreciate the refresher on where we're at. So, Peggy, go ahead.
So why do I keep getting the feeling that we're like 10 days late and 2 years behind?
Great question. I think we're all catching, like trying to do our best to keep up with the process that's in front of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But and I mean, I love everything that has been proposed here today, especially from our scientific members who are just doing a gangbuster job with no resources and no backing. And I mean, I just feel like all of the things that Karina laid out, for one thing, are wonderful projects that either need to be summarized and brought together or started. But, you know, we're already in the process of BOEM's lovely timeline that they get to decide how it's going to go. And we're kind of like being dragged along. That's what it feels like. So I just, I don't know. I really feel for people who are not sitting here listening to this, who are in the general public, who are going to feel the effects of this. I mean, the whole state's going to feel the effects of this. We're all going to suffer for this. And it's maddening for one thing, but I don't know how you ask people who are already over their head in studies and committees and working on stuff to do even more. That is just really the issue, I think.
Well, if I may respond just in general.
Sure.
We have been engaged with the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management since 2019 on this. I began staff work and collaboration with them on a data gathering and engagement plan in 2020. And I feel like that big process that we've spent multiple years in, they have been responsive to stakeholder needs in the state. And I want to give them credit for that. They have created process steps for Oregon that did not exist before. And so I do want to acknowledge that while it seems fast, we have been out there talking about this topic since the year of the pandemic. And I realized that that was a year we all may want to forget. But you know, that was the beginning of kind of more formal process in the state with BOEM. But each of those process steps was really kind of guided by what the federal agency needed for that process perspective. And it wasn't the bigger conversation around how the state wanted to engage in this, what they felt about it, whether they wanted it at all, right? Those weren't
Right.
questions that we
Right.
were set out to kind of ask and answer because of the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act and the way that that is set up.
Mm-hmm.
So the frustration is real in like that, the framing of the issue, right?
Yes, right.
But the,
And I'm just saying that our all of that planning and all of those meetings, Andy, I mean, and I'm not saying that those were not worth it or didn't change or weren't dynamic. I'm just noticing that we don't know what the consequences are going to be. We can do all of the wonderful bureaucratic planning and deliberating and theoretically saying this is what we want to have happen, but we don't know. We don't have enough data or scientific research to tell us what that impact is actually going to be. That's what jumps out at me. What jumps out at me is, hey, you know, we could have a Cascadia event before any of this ever takes place. That would render everything else moot after that. So we just don't know. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't plan or shouldn't do things, but they're just, yeah, I don't know.
Peggy, I totally understand where you're coming from. And to Andy's point, for some of us who have been involved in this process over several years, you know, BOEM has made some changes to accommodate Oregonians' concerns. Like, you know, they did a draft. Oh my God, now I'm gonna get my terms mixed up. They did a draft WIA and accepted comments on that when they didn't have to. You know, so there's been some incremental changes. I think BOEM also learned from other projects that including community benefit agreements are good. There's still some question as to how those are executed, you know, the process by which those are developed, things like that. So BOEM has listened in some respects. In others, I think other people would agree that this is a rushed process. But, you know, we're all feeling the overwhelming, you know, BOEM stuff that's happening without certainty that this will go in without harming our ocean. I think, you know, there's just a lot of questions around that. So I agree.
and if I may respond, I think that the state is both ahead and behind. And when I say that, the state has muscle memory from the development of Part 5 of the Territorial Sea Plan, when wave energy was the driver, right? And at that time, we were seeing preliminary permit applications come in to grab up real estate in the state's waters. And the response to that was timeout. Let's allow the state to create a plan for how we respond to this. We developed part 5 over, I'm going to say 4 to 5 years of time. Policies came first, followed by the completion of comprehensive resource inventories that then resulted in a spatial plan and a framework that associated standards with zones. And that was very significant work. But following on that work, the state was one of the first in the nation to ask for and receive automatic approval to review projects out beyond waters with our geographic location description. So in that way, the state is much better positioned than other states have been and currently are. And so while we have that muscle memory, it still wasn't enough for us to yet feel like we're prepared for the behemoth that could be offshore wind energy, right? So while we have the framework, while we have the experience with planning, while we have policies in place that other states are envious of, we still feel like we need to have more say. And that's just part of the framework of this question. And I think, committing to continue to understand and build the policies that the state wants to have, that we can then use through the tool of federal consistency, because that is the one tool that the state has to potentially keep a project consistent with our vision and the importance of the things that we care about in the state. Like that is the goal right now. The goal is like, hey, wait, we want to get ahead of this game again, because if you think that this is the last time BOEM is going to come knocking with requests for call areas or wind energy areas, I think you're mistaken, right? So this is the opportunity again for Oregon to flex its planning muscles, to flex its community engagement muscles, and to do the job in a way that can really honor what our citizens, what our policies are say. So while it does feel like we're behind, I would challenge that to say that in many ways we are ahead of other places. It doesn't make us feel good in this situation, but we have a lot to go from. We have a lot to learn, and we've got a lot that we've done in the past that we can bring to bear on that question. So that's just a high level summary I mean, this issue is so complex that I get it. It's hard to communicate, and we just need to keep doing it. We need to keep talking about it.
Thank you, Andy. I appreciate that. I really do. And I get what you're saying. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. I'd forgotten a lot of that and how some of this came about because of marine hydrokinetic, wave energy and stuff. But yeah, that is a good history lesson. I'll call on Ray, and then there's also a question in the chat.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's Raymond Roan. I didn't know when I would ever get to speak about what I want to speak, and even if it's in the right spot. But and I also don't know how we oppose the whole roadmap. I do agree with the public comment today from Eric and Charlie specifically. I just have to say this, that we might be ahead of the game from what other states are in, but in my perspective, I've been doing this a long time on this ocean. We might be ahead of the game and finish second to last, and the people that aren't ahead of the game are finishing last, but pretty close to second and last is last. I just don't see the people. We don't know the negative effects on our listed endangered species of our coho salmon, our albatross, and actually the whole entire ecosystem out there. We have no clue. All my constituents know is that we hear about alternative, affordable, good energy, and we all want that. But at what cost? How many albatrosses are we going to kill? I'm sorry, but I just have to say this right now. If one albatross gets killed in the albacore fishery, the whole fishery shuts down. And I see Oregon pretty much getting little or no positive results, only the negative ones. Everything is going to happen is going to go off our coast. And most likely that energy is going to go into California. We're going to get no credit for it at all. but we're gonna be burdened with all the effects of it. So just for the good of the all, we always lose, you know, we just lose here. I'm pretty frustrated with the process, and I think that a lot of people are, and I'm just representing some of my people that don't think this is the proper time, because we don't know what the dollar cost of the product is. We don't know how much it's going to cost. We don't know what we're going to kill. We don't know who's going to benefit. I won't guarantee it, but I go up and down this coast enough. I don't see where we're going to build infrastructure on this coast to facilitate stuff when California has open and ready places to build on. That's pretty much all I have to say now. Just wanted to get it on the record. I don't want to sound like Ano right now, but I'm feeling like him. So thank you, guys.
Thank you, Ray. Appreciate that. So I guess back to Andy, there was a question in the chat. Is that something that you can take a look at and answer for us or help us out with?
Yeah, right now there has not been any additional funding for tribal participation in the roadmap. That does not mean that we may not find that in the future, but right now that is where it stands.
Cool. Okay, any other questions or comments regarding the offshore wind roadmap? I do have a question for Andy. In your overview, you talked about nominations going out. Do you have an idea for positions on the advisory group to DLCD, or are you waiting to receive nominations to see how that plays out?
That is a great question, and while the intent is to be as inclusive as possible, I do not have a list of the representative seats yet finished or finalized. At this time, I've certainly heard from many different members of our communities that they have an interest. So I think that this group is going to be large, and that's okay, because we want as many different diverse perspectives as we can.
Perfect. Thank you. That was my assumption, but I wasn't sure. So I'll go to Amelia and then to Margaret.
Hi, thank you, Chair Susan Chambers. I do have some comments for the considerations document, which first of all, I'd like to say thank you so much for everybody who put a lot of work and time into this extensive and impressive document. And as we discussed in our previous meeting, unfortunately, there wasn't the inclusion of recreational users in the document. And I do appreciate that they put recreation a few times in the document. But following up on what Charlie brought up, Section 3 of this document identifies key topics and objectives, and these include things like protecting the environment, protecting tribal uses, protecting seafood providers and harvesters. I believe that both recreational users and the tourism industry deserves their own objectives separate and alongside these other key objectives identified here. Additionally, in Section 4.2, the document lists a list of potentially affected parties, and it does say it's not all inclusive, but I think we can pretty safely list alongside the other parties listed here, both recreational users and tourism. And in this area, it might be useful, since recreational users are such a diverse group, to break them up regionally. So north, central, south coast, and potentially inland recreational users that may be impacted by affected areas with offshore wind. I don't know if it's appropriate to do so, but if so, I would like to start a motion to formally include protecting recreational uses and protecting tourism as key objectives of the roadmap alongside the other ones previously identified in the considerations document.
Thank you, Amelia. And I think I will, like I requested of Joe earlier, maybe hold that until our our next discussion item.
Okay, should I hold all, I do have a couple more comments.
Oh, no, if they pertain to the roadmap, I'd say go ahead. But our
Okay,
next,
they're on the roadmap considerations document again.
yeah, the next agenda item, we can start with motions or take any action. So.
Oh, perfect. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
The other thing I'd like to take note of is the document talks about quantifying effects of onshore and offshore impacts. I think that for a lot of reasons, we should throw in the word nearshore between those two. The nearshore is so valuable in so many different respects, biologically diverse and productive, all sorts of users, from recreational users to harvesting, occurs in the nearshore, and that we need to draw attention to the nearshore just as much as onshore and offshore impacts. So where those are mentioned, I think we need to include the word nearshore as well. And then I do have like an overarching question. When I talk to the public about offshore wind and this process, and I mention something like the opportunity to have exit ramps, people are very excited. They're very interested. And there's a wonderful list of potential exit ramps included in the considerations document, including things like if assurances to the community that the benefits to them outweigh the costs to them, that if that isn't achieved, that's a potential exit ramp. I guess my curiosity is, what type of authority could these potential exit ramps have in say a state objective or objection to or during a consistency review? It would just be helpful for me to know these exit ramps that are identified in here, I guess what framework they're working within this larger consistency review, etc.
Thank you, Amelia. Good question. Andy or Jeff? You guys have a...
Andy, I'm happy to discuss it unless you'd like to take it.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Okay. So the question being, how do exit ramps relate to the potential for a federal consistency objection? The way that we've been envisioning the place the roadmap can hold is that it can identify, values, interests, information needs, and potential policy recommendations, but that the roadmap itself would not constitute an enforceable policy of the coastal program. So we wouldn't use language directly from the roadmap as a basis for objection. However, if through the discussions of the group, that roadmap identifies a place within the structure of Oregon's enforceable policies where we could strengthen a standard that relates to one of those exit ramps, or create a new standard via rulemaking, amendments to the territorial sea plan, recommendations for legislation, for those more formal processes, that the roadmap could be a pointer to policy amendments the state should make before that second federal consistency review opportunity. that then we would have time to complete those and fold them into the program formally as an enforceable policy under future review. So that's the opportunity that the roadmap provides.
And just to add to Jeff's response, there are criteria for the state when we are submitting program changes that we have to meet, and those are guided by NOAA and the Office for Coastal Management. And I think there's like a list of 7 criteria that they would guide us to, but some of them are things like we can't require financial mitigation as an action. You can't be discriminatory against one type of industry over another, as an example. So there are a list of those criteria, and I would imagine that those will start to become more commonly known as the state begins to think about how we change our policies and how we add enforceable policies. So just know that there's a universe that we will have to work within as we are considering those policy changes. And there are some limitations to that, but as Jeff mentioned, if we create standards by which we could clearly demonstrate a project would be inconsistent with our policy, then that does give us the basis for an objection and an exit from that specific project.
Thank you, Andy and Jeff. That was very helpful to hear. I guess one last note I just wanted to say was, Andy, I was excited to hear that you're forming another working group for the roadmap moving forward. And given that recreational users and I guess also tourism wasn't initially included, I think that makes it that much more valuable to make sure that there are representatives from both of those groups on this future group moving forward. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, Amelia. Margaret, followed by Fran, and then we need to get into our next discussion item. So Margaret, go ahead.
Thanks, Susan. There's so many places to go, and I do feel like it's, other people have gotten to kind of give some more broad comments, and I won't give a lot of those, but I did just want to say, kind of feeling a little bit like Peggy there, just like, we can talk about this a lot, we can talk about policies a lot, but it's not the same as knowing what the impacts might be. And I think there's a lot of concerns that I've heard expressed by Oregon tribes, and of course, their most recent letter to BOEM in May, that I don't believe BOEM has responded to, stating that there hasn't been the good consultation with them, any of the tribes, and that, there's a lot of remaining work to be done. They're asking for a pause to really follow through with that consultation. For the roadmap, I would just say, the roadmap really needs to fold in policies that are enforceable and then be folded. It needs to be included. It needs to be an enforceable document. I mean, all the policies that are included in the roadmap need to be something that could be moved forward into enforceable policies, right? Because that's the mechanism in which, the offshore wind process has, where we have we can make a difference in how this project moves forward if there are enforceable policies set forth in there. I think, avoidance isn't something that is brought up in the current iteration of the Oregon consensus document. Mitigation's brought up a couple times. Both of those are really important to fold into a future roadmap when Oregon's considering it. And I'll really just stop there. I do have some more thoughts, but I'll bring those into the conversation later. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Margaret. Fran, go ahead.
Hello. I hope you all don't roll your eyes. But I want to know if we can change the paradigm. Can we meet Oregon and the nation's energy goals, right? Through, I guess, Mark just brought up, mitigation hierarchy includes avoidance. There is an alternative. There's got to be alternative considerations, right? And what if dispersed, I mean, this is not my thought. This has come up many times. Dispersed energy. You know, you fly into Portland Airport and, you know, there's all these buildings without anything on their empty rooftops, you know, and the Global Oregon's Climate Change Commission, which has a new name now, there are so many opportunities for dispersed energy that leads to more resilience, that has much less impacts on our ocean environment, on our, you know, dredging and estuaries and ocean users. I just don't know where or if this can fit into this roadmap or into our comments back to BOEM saying, where's your alternative analysis of avoidance, of mitigation, which is the highest, you know, so we're all like kind of rolling around and running like mice, you know, in a circular trap, a circular thing to try to get, quote, ahead of something. But we can't get ahead of things if we're not asking the right questions or pushing back to get a different outcome. So I'm just frustrated because you can't get to a different outcome if the paradigm is all set up for you to only be able to comment in that one sphere. And maybe I'm so totally off base and I'll shut up, but it continues to frustrate me that we can't ask those questions and push for an answer other than, oh no, this, you know, we have to allow for ocean development, you know? And what Andy just said there, you know, we can't discriminate against one user over another, you know? Well, we are if we're not looking at, you know, on land solar development or whatever, or anyway, okay. Or even instead of wind turbines, you know, the new ones that don't have blades, that are horizontal, that could probably be a different technology. But anyway, I'll shut up. I just wanted to get it out there.
Thank you, Fran. And I am most definitely not rolling my eyes because I think that has been a question that has come up under several different circumstances. You know, part of what BOEM does is mandated from the president. So it's, you know, BOEM is focusing on what BOEM does. Looking at that more holistic energy opportunity is, I don't know how you do that. You know, we're very reactionary right now, but somebody has a great idea, you know, let's consider it, because I think there are alternatives that are more cost effective, could be better for the environment. But that's just my personal opinion. So I don't know. Andy, go ahead.
Yeah, if I may, you know, the roadmap recognizes that there is a state energy strategy discussion that is also going to be occurring. It was passed as, I think, part of the 2023 legislative session, directing Odo to lead that discussion. And our roadmap recognizes that we need to have that dialogue, that discussion in mind as we consider offshore wind. So Fran, point well taken. We should be, as a state, having this discussion about distributed energy generation versus big projects that are going to produce industry scale amounts of power, and how those two can interplay, how they interact, what, you know, what the state can get out of that. So certainly I would say that we all need to pay attention to that state energy strategy discussion. And if we want to have more conversation about that today, Jason Searman, who's not on the call, could be. He's kind of paying attention. If I send him a flare, he could come on and potentially help us to answer some of those questions. You know, what I understand from communications with him, though, is that the state is going to need a large amount of new power to meet its clean energy goals. And that distributed energy is something that they've looked at, and that's not going to be the silver bullet. So we have to be thinking about these other industry scale projects. But how do they relate? How does wind onshore or solar onshore with battery storage? How, you know, those are all parts of the question that we need to think about. But we are constrained in the moment we're in to respond to the federal consistency decision that we've been handed. So we have our responsibility to interact in the universe, the playground, so to speak, where, you know, we're guided by the Coastal Zone Management Act and the rules of engagement therein, right? And we need to recognize and understand how we can use this tool moving forward. So, you know, I think that is the productive place to have a discussion in this community, and to do what we can in this arena, so to speak, while we're also paying attention to that other one.
So one more question, Susan, if I may. So Andy, is there a way to then have, you know, during this alternatives analysis or mitigation analysis, right, have BOEM analyze alternatives to putting, I mean, it should be, right, in an EA, but that's not what the EA is set out to do. It's like, oh, the EA is about exploration, right? And then later on we get to build, but the EA never, you know, the scope is never defined enough to say, should we even do this? And whether it's a presidential, you know, directive or not, that still doesn't get to the purpose and need, which, you know, should include an alternatives and avoidance analysis. So I don't know if we can get that into anything with the consistency review or not. Are you doing the most you can to avoid and minimize and analyze alternatives? I mean, I don't know where that would fit. I'm Steve Shipsey's the attorney here.
I would say those comments are ones that we would want to hear as a part of our review, and, you know, for us to use as we consider our decision moving forward.
Perfect. Thank you, Fran. Thank you, Andy. I think that leads well into our next agenda item, which is offshore wind energy discussion and recommendations. This is where we may want to take action. So anything related to the offshore wind roadmap, the wind energy research, or the consistency review that we've talked about today, now's your time. Make your comments. Let's talk about it. And I know a couple people had suggestions for motions, but I don't know if that has changed. So, Joe.
Yeah, I'll just bring up that motion again to direct STAC to do further exploration. You know, I think, you know, Karina gave a good starting point, but the core things I'd want to see in that, and this is all, the goal would be to evaluate the creation of an independent technical group that could provide oversight and vetting of projects, science-based projects related to offshore wind process. So I think the key components of that I'd want to see are, and I think some of this is already identified in what Karina presented, is, you know, identifying research gaps. What are the priorities of the research? And I think another thing that is really important is how do we, you know, this body I would see is helping synthesize that research to move it towards adaptive management specific to the BOEM offshore wind process. I think it should be a multidisciplinary group of scientists, and I think the research that Karina presented showed a pretty good breadth of that. Everything from like robotics to ecological and socio-economic research. I think it should be multi-stakeholder, kind of like the regional wildlife group in the East Coast. There's not just academics. There's well, it's largely academics, but there's also NGOs and other constituents that are part of that. I think there should be an evaluation of it's just Oregon focused or West Coast wide, what other groups in the West Coast are doing regarding the same kind of issue. I don't know what the best timing for that would be. I know that Karina has mentioned that STAC is a bit understaffed right now. But I would think some type of report back to OPAC within a year is feasible, hopefully. So I'll put that motion forward and leave it open to discussion for folks to consider.
Okay, thank you, Joe. I just want to double check with Andy. Do we need to get that, do we need to get that motion in writing so we can put it up on the screen to consider it? I think it was pretty long and involved, so I'd like to make sure that everybody understands all the parts of that.
Yeah, Joe, I was listening, but also preparing in the case that we needed a vote to actually tally the votes. So would you be willing to hopefully make a more concise version of the motion? I heard a year of a timeline, but OPAC direct stack to do fill in the blanks there for me.
Or, thank you, Andy. Would it be helpful if Joe, you wrote that out and emailed it to Andy?
Or put
So
it
that-
in the chat for us.
Put it in the chat. Is that possible?
That would be helpful if you have a motion that where you kind of.
It's probably going to take me a few minutes to write something up, so maybe we should move to the other one or get comment on this first while
Sure.
I'm writing it up.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Then I'll go to Jamie and go ahead, Jamie.
Yeah, this is just asking Joe as well here. If Charlie's second point that he made, how does that mesh with Joe's motion here to direct stack to in Charlie's case to summarize and collate existing offshore wind research for Oregon and report on potential mechanisms for housing a state West Coast research hub. Does that mesh with what you're after, Joe?
Yes, yeah, it does.
Thank you, Jamie. Any other comments or questions while we're working on the wording for a motion?
Could I pipe up?
Yeah, please do.
So I want folks to be aware that, all volunteer science board will do kind of X amount of work and have X amount of time to devote with funding for stipends or to have, graduate students or postdocs or, help those lead scientists to do this work would allow a more comprehensive and faster, timeline. So I'm not saying it's not possible without funding. I'm just saying there's a difference in what you'll get out of it in terms of how much volunteer time folks can devote to this. So I heard Charlie mention another potential, some opportunity ideas for how to provide some funding or pursue some funding. I know OPAC doesn't have the funding, but maybe, to recommend funding for that effort might be worthwhile. Marine Reserves Report, for example, you may recall there was money to support the scientists who worked on that study. So.
Right. Thank you, Karina. Good points. Peggy.
I just wanted to say we should talk to our sister funding entity, which is OOST, which does have some money. I don't know how much they have left over. Karina's shaking her head no.
They're looking for more.
They're always looking for more, yes, that I do know. But be worth a try anyway. Maybe to piggyback on one of their already existing grants.
Okay, good idea. Thank you, Peggy.
Could I just respond to Margaret's comment? When I say scientists or science advisory council and adding members and that sort of thing, in my mind, that includes tribal scientists, indigenous knowledge. I have a broad view of what scientific knowledge might be relevant. So Margaret, just to that point, I would like to recommend that the OPAC be explicit perhaps in thinking about the inclusivity of the fields of science that would be relevant. I can bring it when I bring the nomination or, but I just want to make that clear.
Thank you, Karina.
Okay, I have something to cut and paste in the chat here.
Okay, perfect.
Does that all come through? Oh, there we go. It's pretty rough.
Okay, so I think Andy is going to put that in a document on the screen.
Yes.
But it's
Feel free to wordsmith that, Andy.
okay. But just in case some people can't see the chat, it says motion, then Andy has it on the screen. There we go. I don't need to read it now.
Do you need a second for this motion, Susan?
Yes, but first I want to get the motion up as Joe proposed it and make sure we get the wording right.
Yes, I'll just go ahead and read it for the record here. Motion to direct STAC to explore the development of an independent technical committee to identify research gaps, prioritize research, and recommend synthesizing this to recommending adaptive management specific to the BOEM offshore wind process. This would be a multidisciplinary and multi-stakeholder entity. STAC should evaluate if this body would be an Oregon-specific or West Coast-wide entity. Also explore mechanisms for moving this forward, I assume for funding. And that STAC would provide a report back
The mechanism would be for funding
in 1 year.
But also it would be, there are already entities, as Karina mentioned, like that Pacific Offshore Wind Consortium that could potentially be the body. So it's a combo. It's OOST would likely be the financial entity, but
okay.
Okay, did you want to add funding after forward, Andy, just for clarity? There you go.
Funding and like organization, full structure. Is that what you said, Joe?
yeah.
Yep.
And then you could wordsmith after prioritize research where it says and recommend synthesizing this to recommending adaptive. I would say something like and formulate a process or trying to think of the best way to say it. Basically gathering that information on research needs and gaps and providing a way to move that into recommending adaptive management specific to the offshore wind process.
So provide research and recommend synthesizing this in a way to inform adaptive management specific to the BOEM offshore wind, I'm going to say authorization. I'm going to break this into
stakeholder. Okay, does that look right to you, Joe?
Yeah, I think that's gets at it. I'm sure it still could be polished up a bit, but I think that gets at it.
Okay, Fran, I saw your hand, but Karina, I just want to go to you to check if this is within the realm of what you think can be done.
Well, first of all, I guess when it said so I'm thinking it's synthesize existing relevant research, identify research gaps, and prioritize research needs is what I'm suggesting, just to clarify that list of what the scope might be.
Okay, so synthesize first.
Yeah, synthesize existing relevant research, identify research gaps, prioritize research needs.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
Now I'm going to have to try and capture that.
Yep.
Okay.
Let's pause for a
Committee
second.
yeah.
Yep.
Synthesize research gaps.
No, synthesize existing relevant research. Or existing research relevant. Yeah, it's fine. Identify knowledge gaps, data gaps, knowledge gaps might be more comprehensive, and prioritize research needs. In a synthesis, to inform adaptive management specific to blah, blah, blah. That's what I'm, just to clean up the statement.
Yeah, that's a lot better read. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
The other thought related to this that I had, sorry, I had a two-part comment. The adaptive management part, which would be ongoing. It's kind of an assumption that there's ongoing need for monitoring and research. I would recommend that could be a comment to the BOEM proposed sale notice terms.
Okay.
To have lessees fund that or something like that. Just putting that out there.
Okay, that might get to the point where
that's not in here, but that's a side.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Okay. I just want to make sure we get the wording right. So Joe is satisfied. And then we can look for a second, but I am going to go to Tara. Did you have a suggestion on process? Or
language?
Okay.
The way it reads right now, I'm not sure it does what we want. Stacks, I think, motion to direct STAC to explore the development of an independent technical committee, comma, delete that too, synthesize existing relevant research, identify knowledge gaps, and does that make, so we're asking them to do like 4 things, because before it was kind of just like explore. Yeah, that's the change that I think grammatically needed to happen.
Okay.
We were directing them to do what we wanted.
Okay. I just want to make sure we get the grammar right and that it is within the scope of what OPAC, can do. So now does that look right, Joe?
Sorry about the formatting. There's line breaks
Nope.
where there shouldn't be.
That's cool. We can work around that.
Do we want this all to be part of the same motion? or this just to be context to inform the original request?
My thought is it could be context to inform
Okay,
what we would want to see in that body or be evaluated for that body to exist.
okay. Okay, Fran, did you have something related to context or grammar, or I mean, grammar or specificity in the motion?
Yeah, I put it in the check. I'm not understanding what's the purpose of the adaptive management is. Is it adaptive management about research? Or it says
Okay,
specific to the offshore wind authorization process? Or is it adaptive management regarding minimizing impacts that are, you know, highlighted by the research?
The thought I have, Fran, on that is that we're in a years-long process where there's a bunch of science being done by BOEM and others, and we need this kind of independent group to evaluate, is that being done correctly, number one, and once we have some results coming in, this group can be a separate body outside of the agency to help say, oh, we need to really, you know, change this type of management or change these types of surveys to get better information. So that's where the adaptive management comes in. Does that help at all?
I think so. Okay, so let's hold there for a minute, because I think we're starting to get into discussion.
So I
So,
saw Tara's comment, and I think that the timeline of the request should be in the motion. So I moved a
Yep.
report back to the council in a year.
Perfect.
And I think that could be approximately, you know, we meet, you know,
Right.
once in the spring and once in the fall. So that it, you know, I think there was an understanding that it would be at the council's meeting that the report back would occur.
Okay.
And I'm using some of the language that was in the roadmap document that we had to review on page 28. I'm going to drop it in the chat just so you can see it in case there's any other wordsmithing you want to
Okay.
do, Andy.
Great.
Okay. Okay, now I think we have it pretty clear, so I'll look for a second.
I'll second that.
Second.
That was Fran?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, any further discussion? I know you dropped the roadmap page and everything into the chat, so further discussion on Joe's motion. Fran?
I'm sorry, I'm still, even though I see that language in the that Joe posted, it's not clear what the adaptive management is specific to research for the BOEM offshore wind authorization. There's something wrong with just adaptive management specific offshore wind authorization process. I'm just,
It
maybe
might be
I'm
a better
just
way
not
to
getting
say
it.
it. The way what I'm trying to think of is that there's all this great research going on, but this body can help direct that research to inform management.
Yeah, but it's not clear. I understand that. It's
Okay.
just not clear that it relates to the research.
If you have a thought on
Adaptive management needs specific to research for the BOEM offshore wind authorization.
Okay, so question for Andy and Steve, I guess. Can we make changes at this point that since it's been moved and seconded?
The second would have to accept the change
Okay.
as well as the mover.
Okay. Thank you, Steve.
I think it needs to say adaptive management needs for research.
And monitoring?
Yeah, and monitoring.
Because, yeah.
If Joe's okay with that, I'll accept it as my second.
it's fine. Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Yay. Okay, thank you, Andy. Thank you, Steve. We have a motion. Do you or Fran want to discuss it more? And I'll open it up for OPAC questions if you don't have anything more to add. Nope. Any other questions for Joe about his motion? I don't have a participant list up here.
I am going to enter this into the chat.
Okay.
And then I'm going to stop sharing because I want to be able to see everyone.
Right.
Because I think the next step is whether or not the council has consensus on this motion or whether or not it needs to be a vote.
Right. Peggy, do you have a question?
I as Fran has brought up, I'm seeing that motion to direct staff to explore the development of an independent technical committee, synthesize existing relevant research. That isn't the independent technical committee supposed to be synthesized, doing those following things? So wouldn't there need to be a slight, Tara, what do you think? Does that?
No, I mean, my understanding is we would want staff to do that work, to synthesize the current.
Right, but
and do all that work and develop a.
It just feels a little clunky moving into it. Motion to direct staff to explore the development of an independent technical committee that would synthesize existing relevant research, identify knowledge gaps. It's just.
No, I think we want staff to do that work, not the committee that they will explore. Does that make sense?
I think Karina can probably help us.
Yeah.
Suggestion that what staff is doing is scoping a charge for an independent technical committee, and that might be a staff working group or something like that. You know, it could even be like, where should it, staff might make a recommendation about it. Is it with POWSI? Is it with STAC? Is it, like, does that sound right? Is that what you're asking for?
Yes, yes, that makes it clear to me. Anyway.
I'm not sure if it's consistent with the intention though, so.
Right.
Well, but we also want that, I mean, to be clear, I thought we also wanted staff to synthesize existing relevant research, identify knowledge gaps, do all that work as best we can, and then also separately explore and make a recommendation for what a independent technical committee looks like.
Right.
So we wanted to do all those things.
Yeah. And I think those three specific tasks would inform the scoping of what.
Right.
So maybe it's backwards in the order in the sentence that makes it confusing.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of what you guys are saying was my intention. It is a little clunky though.
I think as long as Karina, you're here and you understand the context, you understand what we're asking for, I think it reads fine from I think that's fine, but it's really, as long as you have the proper guidance and understanding, I think we'll be okay.
If we just reverse the order of those phrases and put the, I would just propose that way everybody's on the same page. It sounded like it was clearer for other people if you put it kind of in the order in which it would happen.
I'll defer to Andy on our process here because we now have a motion on the floor. So we either have to.
Yeah, I don't know what that. Sorry.
It, or if you want to propose an amendment to that motion, either way would be fine.
So Andy or Steve?
I think I understand the intent well enough. You want the actions of synthesizing existing relevant research, knowledge gaps, and prioritized needs, and that those would need to be considered in the development of a technical committee. And those are 4 separate things that are all interrelated.
Yes.
So I feel like I understand the request. I'm seeing Karina nod. So I don't know that we need to wordsmith this further. Although maybe Karina and I could just if we have that guidance, we could really fine tune this together. But as I understand it, that is the request to stack.
So thank you, Andy, for that. So question to Steve Shipsey, if we have this motion as is with the discussion that we've had to clarify, will that satisfy what we need for the record?
Yeah, I think you have two options. You can have the motion as is and the context, the discussion that we've just had for clarity, or you could take the moment to try to clarify the language, have the mover and the seconder agree to that new language, and then have your vote. So either option would work.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. Joe, I see your hand up. Do you have a preference for which way you would like to?
I was just going to suggest, I agree with all of Andy's reorganizing and of everyone's thoughts to make it more clear, because that is the intention. I think maybe that could be done by Andy while we are talking on this. I think there's another motion from Amelia. So just as
Nope. I don't want to go there yet.
Okay. Okay.
But thank you. Okay.
I don't have a preference then, whatever works best.
Okay. Andy, why don't we take a break and you can work with Karina and Joe and Fran to get the wording as they want. And then we can come back and say 5 minutes. Does that work?
Margaret has a suggestion, so maybe she could join us.
Okay. Before we go there, Andy, would that work? And then I'll go to Margaret.
Yes, that would be okay.
Okay. Margaret.
I want Karina. Can Karina, help with this? Yeah, that's good enough for me.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay. So taking a break for 5 minutes for you guys to work on the wording? Yes?
Yep.
Okay. Andy, do you know how to get them together in one room or just work via email so we can come back and say 7 minutes? Let's come back at 11:50.
Hey, can you send us to a breakout room? That would work well.
I don't know.
Let me check.
It's up to Andy's technological finesse.
Given
Yes.
given this situation, if other makers of motions want to have in this break, get your language ready and maybe send it to Andy so we can try to move more efficiently, given we're coming up against the end of our time. But
Yep.
Yeah, I see that Margaret has a motion and I know Amelia had a motion as well. So making sure we.
Good idea.
Margaret, sorry.
So it was Margaret, Joe, Fran, Tara. Like I think I've got the breakout room.
And Karina.
I don't need to go to that breakout room.
Me neither.
I actually would like to talk to Amelia because I have an inclination about her motion and it having to do with the roadmap. Is that correct? Because I have a roadmap thing as well. So I don't know.
Okay, do you guys have each other's contact information?
Mm-mm.
Okay. One of you send it to the other one in the chat.
Okay.
And then you guys can talk while we take a 5 or 6 minute break. While we take a 6 minute break to get this motion wrapped up.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm gonna try and open the breakout room.
Okay, so let's go on break. Come back at 11:50. And Andy and others can work on the motion. Amelia and Margaret can talk, and then we'll get through this quickly. Okay.
I am going to join.
Oh, here he is. Okay.
Hey, Andy.
All right.
But we're here.
Let me share my screen.
Do you ever get time to play all your instruments?
It's usually after work and after all of the other responsibilities. But yes, I do still play. Where did
Good.
my
your Google Doc or whatever you had.
There. All right. Are you seeing the motion?
No, I'm
No.
seeing your like desktop right now.
Oh, geez. That's not helpful.
I could put it in the chat for this room if unless you had wordsmithed it after what was put in the chat earlier. Oh, I guess we did. Never mind.
I will just share that. Okay.
Yeah,
Are
that's
you
it.
okay?
Yeah, I am, but it's very small.
Why
Let
don't
me
you
make it
just go
bigger.
in, Andy, and because you had it sounded like you had a vision to change it in a good way, and just
Well, I just really so what I did here, motion to direct stack to synthesize existing relevant research, identify knowledge gaps, and prioritize research needs in its synthesis to inform adaptive management needs for research and monitoring. I'm going to put in parentheses specific to the BOEM authorization process. Stack is also directed to explore the development of an independent technical committee based upon the results of the previous actions.
yeah,
And Stack would provide a report back to OPAC in 1 year.
yeah. And then should you have those context items below it?
Yeah, and then this would be below it.
Okay,
These
yeah.
things.
You could put them in bullets or something. I don't know if that helps,
Yeah.
but-
Okay.
So just for clarification, Joe, right?
Yeah.
It's not wordsmithing, I'm just asking. So the stack is using these results to develop an independent technical committee that would do what?
So they're exploring options. So there are independent
second.
technical committees like the Regional Wildlife Science Consortium in the East Coast. Right now, there's not an independent technical committee to review any of the science BOEM is doing. There's a task force, but there's no outside independent group vetting the work.
Yeah,
And
I wonder if we should say that. I'm not questioning the need for that, right?
it says independent. I think that captures it.
No, but to do what? Independent technical committee to review
To vet
science coming out of BOEM, out of
Right.
the wind leases. I think we need to
Hold on
say,
a second.
what does it do?
You could say this independent technical committee would vet science monitoring activities
Suggested by BOEM.
related to the offshore wind process. Yeah, I think BOEM, but there's other entities as well. So I don't know if we want to just say BOEM, but we could say the BOEM process.
Yeah, I think we need a purpose statement for that independent committee. Andy?
Sorry, I am trying to manage I was going to get Karina in here, but she's not.
Oh, that's okay.
And
That's right.
I really feel like we're running out of time here. So
yeah, but I think we need a purpose statement for this independent technical committee to provide ongoing input or oversight of
offshore wind activities.
provide a research perspective.
What did you say, Fran? You said a different word, research oversight.
Provide, oversight. Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know that it would be oversight, but provide a perspective on regional research or needs, Oregon and or regional research needs.
And potential recommendations too on how research should be directed.
Right.
Yeah, because I don't think it's based on previous actions. I think it's
the previous actions were just this the
take those
research.
away, right? Because it's an ongoing after that, right?
So remove this. Okay.
Of regional research needs and recommendations.
All right. You probably get back now.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Okay.
How do I even do this? Leave room.
You should be able to leave.
There he is.
They made it back.
All right. Hi, folks. Sorry, that was probably way more clumsy than it needed to be.
It's okay. As long as we get the work done that we need.
I just felt so left out.
I wanted to pull you in and then I couldn't when I was in the breakout room. Yes. Note to self, don't try new things when you're in the middle of a meeting.
I should not have suggested it. I thought maybe you knew how to do it. I'm sorry.
I'm going to share my screen and we will go to the revised motion.
Maybe next time we have a co-host too, just so that we can work through it.
Here we go. Okay. So we switched the order of things. So the first sentence is motion to direct stack to synthesize existing relevant research, identify knowledge gaps, and prioritize research needs in a synthesis to inform adaptive management needs for research and monitoring. And I put in parentheses specific to the BOEM offshore wind process. Stack is also directed to explore the development of an independent technical committee to provide perspectives on Oregon or regional research needs and recommendations. And I don't think we decided whether or not Oregon or regional was the priority. And I think that's something that, you know, the investigation could shed light on. I think it should be regional, but open to suggestions.
Thank you,
No,
Mandy.
Steve Shipsey needs me to say that motion. I'll just say it, that motion is fine with me the way we've reworded it. And if we need a second again from someone, then.
Right. So Fran seconded, so is she?
I'll accept those changes.
Okay. Okay. Now we have it motioned, moved by Joe, seconded by Fran. We have the wording right. Is there any more OPAC discussion before we look for consensus? Not seeing any hands. Wait, let me pull up the participant screen.
Nope, I'm seeing no hands as well.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you, Mandy. Thank you guys for doing that. Looking for consensus. Give a thumbs up on your screen. Oh, I guess I better turn on my camera. Okay. Looking for consensus. Nod your head. Thumbs up. Okay,
I'm seeing nothing but consensus.
Yep.
Okay.
Same here.
Great. Motion passes.
Wonderful. One down. Thank you all. I think that's good. We are running short on time, but we did have another motion to consider.
Yes.
And
Yeah,
Amelia?
go ahead, Amelia. I actually have another one in addition to this one, but go ahead, Amelia.
Okay, Margaret and I were just discussing motions for the roadmap going forward. So I would, if appropriate, like to make a motion to formally include both recreational users and tourism to the objectives outlined in the considerations document. And in addition to the considerations document as well, we would like to continue the motion to include in the exit ramps clear direction to avoidance and minimization that were listed in the document, in the considerations document. I think we probably need to work on that wording. I apologize for stab.
Okay, and did you send that to Andy by chance?
I have not gotten a chance to do that.
Okay.
You can go ahead and put it in the chat if you have it written down. I heard motion to include both recreational and tourism users in the considerations document. Which part of the considerations document?
I apologize, I jumped the gun a little bit there. In section 3 that outlines key topics and objectives, I would like to include both protecting recreational users and tourism as separate and individual objectives in addition to the existing objectives identified in the considerations document for the roadmap moving forward. In maybe less words.
Okay. Let me again put this on the screen. I will make it bigger. So motion to include protecting both recreational and tourism users to the considerations document, section 3, the key topics and objectives. What else was in there?
Can I just say, like, this feels very specific, and I know that Amelia and I have different you know, recommendations here, but mine is more broad, and it's just, you know, and you haven't developed the roadmap yet, so I don't really want to put a section to my section. It's more just a general comment that there needs to be like clear direction about avoidance and minimization and how that's processed in the roadmap, right? And so I think Amelia's motion does relate to including those things in addition to the objectives that were already in the considerations document. And this is kind of another addition or like clarification that needs to be folded in as well. So I'm not quite sure, we couldn't figure out how to phrase that motion in the time that we had, but that's just a general sense of like what we're going for here, Andy, so you can hear it and the rest of OPAC. And just thinking it out loud, if any other, I know Fran also brought up some avoidance and minimization things, so if she had anything to add or anybody else had some priority things that need to be folded into the roadmap, I think this is maybe the place to make those recommendations.
I would just add alternatives analysis.
Okay, Tara, you had your hand up. Did you have a comment specific to this?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, I want to be clear. I fully support Amelia's intent with that language, but one, I don't think we need a motion for this, but second, that document is not an OPAC document. It's not a state document. So adding language to it is not really.
Yeah. And what I'm recommending is not adding language to that.
No, I know. I'm speaking specifically to what Amelia put forward, and also that I wanted to support what you said, Margaret, around, I think this is the time for OPAC, and maybe this takes the form of a letter to the governor or DLCD as they're developing the roadmap, what the things OPAC wants to see in the roadmap. And we can honestly put aside the considerations document. I think we can cite it to say there was a miss in not including specific things, and here's what we would add or put forward. So I wanted to make that clear. I'm a little worried about trying to amend a document that's not ours. And think that maybe instead of a motion here, we could maybe put together a letter that could do all of these things that we might want. So that's what I want, general comment broadly.
But we'll still need a motion for the letter, right? We'll still need a motion to write the letter about recommendations to the roadmap to the agency, or
I don't know that a motion is necessary for that. I think if there's enough direction from the council, like we've done in the past, the executive committee can work with whatever interested OPAC members to draft that and make sure we get the language right. Or if we really want to make sure there's specific language, we could sit here and get a motion. So I think we're good either way, but I'll defer to Andy and Steve on that.
I think it would be good. I mean, just my perspective, I think it would be fine if OPAC if we, brainstorm some bullet points to include. We could put those up on the screen, talk about those, make sure they're clear, and then give that direction to the OPAC Executive Committee to write that letter. But Steve or Andy, is that out of the realm? Does that go too far? Not far enough?
I would, go ahead,
ahead,
Steve.
I'm comfortable if we're, I think the vice chair had a very good point that we can influence either the governor or the agencies, but we can't direct action toward a third party. So having it be where you have consensus that from the council that we're going to provide guidance to either DLCD, the governor, or both, about including recreation and tourism and, these other considerations that we want a state document to include would be appropriate.
Perfect. Thank you, Steve. Margaret, does that answer your concerns?
Yeah, and I do think I'm good with that. I just want to add in Fran's last comment that, oh yeah, you got sorry.
Yeah. Thank you,
Okay.
Margaret. Amelia, does that answer your concerns?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted it to be recognized going forward that they would be key objectives. And if it doesn't warrant a motion, I'm very happy with that.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you guys. Thank you both for thinking about these things and proposing them. So
Andy? I do think it is important to document this as a motion from the council today. And I would say that it's directing a motion to direct the executive committee to write a letter to the governor's office and DLCD, and then the rest of the sentence applies.
So moved.
Okay.
Well, let's make sure that we have everything in there that we want.
So we have the inclusion of recreation and tourism. We have the concepts of avoidance and minimization of the effects from offshore wind, and including an alternatives analysis. Tara has her hand up.
Oh, Tara, yes, thank you.
I also wanted to potentially suggest something brought up in public comment around funding for this work, and that we are seeing funding from conservation and other priorities that this council has supported being potentially moved to support offshore wind work. So I don't know how to phrase that in this, but including that in the letter to the governor's office, that we want to ensure that those funding sources are protected. We've previously spoke to the governor about, funding for rocky habitats and marine reserves, and making sure that that funding stays secured, and that we seek other additional funding for this work that doesn't impact those current needs. So wanted to lift that up, as I know it was in public comment. I made note of it.
So Tara, just my immediate response is there is a direction in House Bill 4080 for the state agencies to include in their assessment agency capacity to work on the roadmap. And I think that may handle what you just mentioned.
So perhaps just letting support
so perhaps
for that,
we don't need
and
that.
ensuring
Yeah.
that but still ensuring that work doesn't result in, hey, we need more capacity, so we're going to take capacity from other programs, or something along those lines.
Yeah, I agree with Tara. I think it should be spelled out in the letter.
Okay.
Agreed, just because they're already doing it, trying to do
Yeah,
it.
right. Give them more money and they'll find another place to put it besides where we want it to go.
Okay. How does that read to you all?
I just want to bring it forward, the point that the comment made earlier by Rick, that is there going to be funding for tribes? I think there is a kind of a request out there. I'm not clear on that. I know there's a request specific to BOEM, but I don't know that there's a request specifically to DLCD, but I know that tribes generally are seeking funding to participate in processes related to offshore wind.
I'm okay including that if the
How about
rest,
agency and tribal capacity to engage? Will that do it, Margaret?
That would be lovely.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, I'm not seeing anybody else with suggestions or comments.
so then I think we need process, right? So Laurel?
Just pointing out that the second part of that sentence doesn't have reference to the tribal governments.
Yes. Without capacity for other agency or tribal functions?
Or you could just flip it, right? You could put the agency ahead of the tribal governments, maybe. Would that work, Laurel?
Yeah, I just didn't want it to be missing from the sentence.
Okay, well, Andy's working on that. Jamie?
Yeah, just to make sure that the second part addresses Charlie's third recommendation.
Okay, which was, I gotta look at the chat.
Which was the council should make recommendations to the governor's office to protect existing nearshore ecological and biological monitoring. Apparently there's efforts now to take that away from ODFW in front of their commission, remove Oregon's only nearshore long-term ocean ecological biological monitoring to support a position to further the development of siting offshore wind. That was his number 3 in part that he put in the chat.
I think that the this piece would get at that with the context that we are referencing Charlie's third recommendation from public comment.
I was just gonna ask you about that, because that was my understanding, but is there another interpretation that I'm missing?
I guess I would look to Steve's guidance on that. I feel like with our recording and with our record and the language, I feel like we can make sure that the executive committee honors that intent.
Then I think you're good to go, Andy.
Great.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, so now I guess, Andy, you were gonna say something?
Just who would like to make the motion?
Exactly.
I did. I will.
Peggy.
Okay,
I'll second it.
is that Jamie?
Okay.
Okay, so we have a motion by Peggy, seconded by Jamie, with the wording that is on the screen.
And I'm going to put it in chat so that I can then stop sharing and
Perfect.
see you all.
Okay, now looking for consensus. Thumbs up or head nod. Good, good, good. Okay, I'm not seeing any thumbs down, so I think we have consensus. Am I right, Andy?
Yes, I see consensus and I motion pass.
Okay. Well done. Okay, I know we are over time, but these offshore wind projects are meaty subjects. Is there any more discussion before we start our recap and scheduling for our next meeting?
I have another motion. And it's really like, it's unknown to me if all of the rest of you and your constituencies like have a similar feeling. So this is really a motion that I'm making from the tribal representative seat, but also, you know, recognize that all of you are here to kind of balance out some of that motion, but the motion really is for OPAC to make a recommendation to the governor's office to request BOEM to pause until the roadmap is complete. I think that, I mean, that's it. So that's the motion that's on the table. Welcome discussion about it, or to see if anybody's ready to make a decision on that today, but.
Okay, I'd like to see that in writing. Andy, did you capture that, or Margaret, can you put that in chat so we can get it up on the screen?
Yeah, I got a motion to ask the governor's office to pause the offshore wind leasing process until the roadmap is complete. Is that?
Okay. I do have one process question, and well, I'll wait till you get on the screen.
Go ahead.
So my question is, can the governor's office pause the offshore wind leasing process, or do we have to ask the governor to ask BOEM to pause the leasing process?
So mine says request. You don't have that in there, but my motion in the chat says request. So this is just a request.
Okay.
They
Yeah.
cannot do that. Yeah, the governor's office cannot do that.
Right. I mean, that was my assumption, but you know, hey, I don't know everything, so I want to make that clear. Okay. Okay, so Margaret, does that reflect your motion wording the way you want?
Yes.
Okay.
I hear a lot of crickets though. I feel like I'm kind of shocked, maybe
No,
shocked.
No, I just want to make sure that the wording is correct so that we can continue. And for context, my question to you is, so this would be before BOEM holds an auction, or would it be, is there some other part of the process that you were thinking of?
I mean, I think there's been a request on the table for a pause from the coastal Oregon tribes put out there in their recent letter. And so I don't know if that's just been, I think that's been an ongoing request from specific tribes on the coast, but now it's like this group request, and like it was the request was submitted in, early May. So I think the process just keeps moving forward. So I think it's just like,
Okay.
the process needs to pause whatever stage it's in. Right. And it keeps kind of rolling. So if we make it specific, it might be an issue. I don't know.
Okay, because I wasn't sure if, since there's a proposed sale notice out, if it would be pause it before finalizing the sale notice, pause it before they actually hold an auction. Do we need to get into that level of detail? I guess that's an ask for Andy or Steve, or is this sufficient enough of a request that the governor can actually do this? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. The request could certainly be made.
Okay, do we have to get into the specificity of before a final sale notice or before an auction, or does leasing process cover that? Or would it make a difference?
I mean, the pause needs to happen now. I mean, the pause is just like a pause until the roadmap is done. So I don't know if it matters where BOEM is at technically. I mean, maybe it does. Does the offshore wind leasing process cover a big enough area? I mean, the request is really until the roadmap. That's the target timeline, is the roadmap. It's not really related to where BOEM is in the process, but I do understand what you're saying, Susan. So I don't want to be, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I just also want to, how are we supposed to know where Bowen's going to be at in the process? I haven't been able to figure that out yet. So.
Right. No, I totally understand. And I don't get that you're being, you're not being disrespectful at all. I'm just thinking of Bowen's process and making sure that there's no gray area for them to say, oh, we could do the final sale notice, but if we, so that includes the auction or whatever. That's all. I just want to make sure that we get.
I appreciate that clarification. I mean, like, we really do want to be specific, as specific as possible with Bowen. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. So. Okay. So to Andy and Steve, does this cover that sufficiently? Do you think?
I think it's clear that the request is to pause the process in whatever state it's in. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Then I'm good with that. Okay, so Margaret, if that is correct on your motion, looking for a second.
I'll second. Finally, I'll say something.
Welcome, Nick.
5 Zoom meetings all in one day so far, and I got back on with you guys. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, any council discussion? Oops, and I don't have my participant list up here. Tara.
Yeah, I don't have specific discussion other than to note, I don't think the council has discussed this sort of request. So wanted to put that out there and think that we should hear from council members. I think it would be good to have some discussion here.
I agree.
Yeah, I'm not saying the council shouldn't support it. I don't know that we've.
Right.
Yeah, I think the silence to your initial proposal was just more that we are all now contemplating this. So. Exactly.
And I did not bring this to any other council for discussion prior to this meeting. So this is really just, from my tribal representative seat on OPAC.
Nope, fair enough.
So I just wanted to say one thing too, that the one thing that this does, it adds to the paperwork that we've already sent to BOEM. And now this is in a separate process for us that we're making this request. So I think it's valid.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Peggy, you had your hand up a little bit ago. Did you have something?
Yeah. I guess I wanted to ask Margaret whether this was a request directly from the tribes to us, to OPAC, to act as a voice to the governor's office.
I think that was not my initial thinking behind the request. My initial thinking behind the request is to understand if all of OPAC is, similarly positioned. I am only representing the constituency of Oregon coastal tribes. And I don't have, I am not representing a tribal nation when I say this. I'm just representing what has been put on paper, to agencies like BOEM. So, and yeah, that second thought, I guess that is something that I would consider. But I first want to see how OPAC is feeling about this motion generally.
So
because I think that's good to know.
Okay, so in other words, what you're asking for is OPAC to support what the tribes have already requested from the governor's office. Is that right? Because that's not what the motion looks like. It looks like OPAC is saying, Governor, you should do this. And I think instead you're asking us to say to the governor's office, hey, Governor, the tribes have contacted you and we want to let you know that we're supporting their position. And those are two different things in my mind anyway.
Okay.
Not that it means that we shouldn't support the tribes. So I'm not going down that road, but do you understand what I'm saying?
I do understand what you're saying.
Okay.
I hear it. And I'm just thinking, I think I would be very supportive if the motion was changed. So it was like, does OPAC support the tribe's position in pausing? And requesting the governor's office, but it still needs to be a request that the governor's office pause.
Right.
Well, it's
but it
whatever the
could be
tribes
court-
have asked the governor to do. That's what we're supporting.
Tara, I think you have a comment pertinent to this, so go ahead.
Sorry, when I tried to click unmute, I clicked the little corner icon in my computer that like pops up the weather app or something crazy. I mean, I understand that there's some like language here, but I actually don't know that it matters in practice. Like if OPAC's supporting the tribe's request for a pause, then OPAC's supporting a pause. So I don't know that that matters. I think we could note in a letter that the tribes have also asked for this or something. I just don't know that I mean, it's semantics. I think if we're supporting a pause as OPAC, whether it's because the tribes requested it or because we support a pause, it's not, you know, I think that is consideration for the council and that our tribal representative is bringing it to us.
Thank you, Tara. I tend to agree. But more discussion about this.
Yeah, I agree as well. The tribes are represented on OPAC. OPAC is speaking as a body. I think it's fine as is.
Mhm. Thank you, Jamie. Other comments?
Yeah, I will just say that we have, like, from the conservation community, we have not specifically asked for this. But I also believe there's a feeling that this process has gone we are supportive of offshore wind development if done responsibly. I think that we felt this process has gone quickly and that the proper environmental analysis and factors that we would like to see considered have not been taken into account in moving forward. So again, we have not specifically asked for this in the past, but I don't think it does not necessarily align with our feeling about the need for more analysis and more discussion ahead of leasing.
Do you want the motion to include the language about the roadmap, including more analysis, the roadmap being part of like more analysis? Like, does it need to be more specific for that if you were to support?
I don't think necessarily. I'm just sort of speaking out loud of the position that the conservation community has taken. And I would also look to Joe as another conservation rep who has weighed in on this a lot to, you know, I don't know that there's a big difference in things that we have asked for around additional analysis, the call for a programmatic environmental impact statement, really wanting to make sure that we're accounting for and being precautionary and thinking ahead in siting and planning for multiple offshore wind projects off of our coast, not just Oregon, but the whole West Coast. So yeah, I'm more just speaking out loud that I don't know that we've never specifically asked for a pause to the governor or even BOEM, but we have asked BOEM to do a lot more analysis before moving forward. So I don't know that those are different requests in practicality, if that makes sense. But I'm just sort of working through this out loud.
Joe.
There are actually a subset of conservation and environmental groups that have written a letter to BOEM in support of the tribal stance, including Bird Alliance of Oregon. And so I actually need to hop off this call soon, like probably everybody else, but I'm gonna support this motion as it stands now. If I have to jump off, I'm gonna put my second on there.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. I think that's valuable and to the point that we do need to wrap up soon. I think we've gathered enough context in the discussion to support making some points about why we are, you know, writing this letter to request a pause. Andy, is that sufficient to provide rationale for the request in the letter?
Yes.
Okay.
I was going to ask that question. I envision that this request would be included in the letter. I want to be clear about that because we've already said that the executive committee will be drafting
Right.
that. So this would be accompanying that.
The rationale.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That would be my understanding.
Yes.
Okay. So recognizing we're in a little bit of a time crunch, any other quick questions before we look for consensus? Okay. Thumbs up or nod your head if you agree with this letter. And okay, I'm not seeing any down thumbs. Okay. Andy.
Okay,
are we good?
motion passes
Yep.
by consensus.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, in the interest of time, do we have any other discussion about offshore wind energy recommendations regarding the roadmap? Anything else that we've talked about today? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Going once, going twice. Okay. Real quick recap. Can we do that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So Andy, where are we for scheduling OPAC in 2024 and 25? We discussed a spring and fall meeting, is that correct?
Yes, the doodle poll was not sent out, but I still have the weeks of October 15th through 18th identified to query you all, and April 28th through May 2nd is the week in the spring of 2025. So apologies that hasn't gone out. It has been busy, but that will go out and we will get that on calendars as soon as we can get everyone's responses.
Okay.
I guess if there are known conflicts now with those windows, please reach out to let me know. But
Andy,
we'll get that through
what are the dates in October again, please?
October 15th through the 18th.
Okay. And April what?
28th through May 2nd.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So is there anything as part of that discussion that we want to propose now for action items or anything on that agenda, or we can supply Andy with suggestions separately?
We're talking, are we doing TSP stuff? We're doing TSP part 3 stuff, right? That'll be, I'm guessing we're doing it anyway, so I don't need to make it as a recommendation because I feel like we've already talked about how it's going on the agenda.
Yeah, I think we did decide that we would have that as a fall agenda item. So that will be on there for sure.
Okay.
And I will query OPAC members for ideas as we get closer to that time.
Perfect.
I mean, you brought up TSP part 5. Is that something we need to just have as a discussion starting in October?
I think that would be a good idea. Yes.
I'll stop.
All good. Okay, any other, I don't mean to rush, but I know you guys are all really busy too. So anything else before we adjourn? Andy, Tara, any other comments?
No, just thank you all for a great meeting today.
Tara?
No, just would echo, thank you for a great meeting, good discussion. I know we all have 100 things going on related to this topic right now. And I did just see Margaret's comment on timelines for the letters that we've recommended. And I can't give a specific one, but Susan, the executive committee will get together as soon as possible and try to churn those out. It's I guess on us now.
Yeah.
start drafting. And we can, I will also say we can, whoever would like to be a part of drafting those letters, I think, you know, in the past, we have invited other OPAC members into helping with drafting if there's a desire.
Very good point. Okay, so with that, I'll look for a motion to adjourn. Joe?
Yes, I second that motion to adjourn.
Okay, everybody good with adjourning for today?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I know it was long, I know it was time consuming, but it was really good discussion. And I'm sure we'll have more, so I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Andy.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank
Thanks,
you all.
everybody.
Susan, thanks, Andy.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
Andy?
everyone. Great meeting.
Andy,
Yes.
we forgot to adopt the meeting summary from last meeting, didn't we?
Oh, we did.
Well, can we do it
that-
next time, or should
That's
we?
okay. We can
do we
do it
have
next
quorum
time.
now?
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
we adjourned. There wasn't anything that is like that we have to do
Right.
out of that
Okay.
meeting summary.
I just remembered. Yeah. Apologies.
Yeah.
But we'll do that. We'll add that to the agenda to approve 2 meeting summaries.
Yeah.
Okay.
Put a
You're
big
fine.
star after
Just
that.
track
and
it and add it.
tell
Yep.
them
Right. I just realized. I just wanted to note it for our own sense.
Yes, thank
Okay,
you.
Thanks.
All good.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.